I didn't touch it. That's the sentence I kept whispering to myself as I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, staring at the glowing screen on the wall across the hallway. The thermostat had always been my set it and forget it. Comfort 68 at night, a soft hum from the vents, the kind of quiet winter routine that makes you feel safe in your own house. But at 3:47 am, the house felt like an oven, and the thermostat read 95 degrees in angry red digits, like it was daring me to argue. I swung my legs out of bed, and the sheets stuck to my skin. Somewhere downstairs, a vent blasted hot air hard enough to rattle the register. My wife mumbled half awake, asking if I'd turned the heat up. I hadn't. I walked into the hall squinting at the screen, and tapped the down arrow until it slid back to 68. The numbers held for exactly 2 seconds. Then click 95 again like an invisible finger pressed the button right after mine. I told myself it was a glitch. I told myself the house was old, the Wi-Fi was spotty, the app was buggy, anything except the one thought that kept rising like bile. Someone else is in here, and they're not using the door. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a notification from the Smart Home app, new login. The location pin wasn't my city. It wasn't even my state. Before I could open it, another alert slid onto the screen. Front door unlocked. Downstairs there was a soft, polite sound like the deadbolt turning. Not a crash, not a kick. A smooth, confident little motor doing exactly what it was told. Outside, the wind slapped the windows, and the weather app had warned us about a blizzard rolling in the kind that buries cars and makes the world feel cut off. The idea of the front door being open during that storm made my chest tighten in a way heat never could. In the same moment, the hallway lights flicked off, then on, then off again, like someone was blinking at me from the dark. I whispered my wife's name. She sat up, suddenly wide awake, and that's when the smart speaker in the living room, our cheerful little assistant that tells jokes and sets timers, let out a laugh. Not the canned ha-ha it does when you ask it to be funny. A slow, breathy chuckle that started low and climbed like a person trying not to laugh in a quiet room. The laugh ended with a tiny inhale, the way a real throat resets, and that's when I realized I was listening for breathing in my own house. I didn't want to go downstairs. I didn't want to look. But the security panel on my phone showed the front door is open, and the temperature still screamed 95. I took one step toward the stairs, and the TV downstairs turned on by itself, filling the living room with bright, snowy static. Not a channel, not a menu, just that harsh hissing light that makes your eyes water. The speaker laughed again, in time with the static, like it was enjoying the noise. Then the lights in the kitchen blinked in a pattern, 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. So deliberate, it made my skin crawl. Yes, yes. Or maybe that was my brain trying to put meaning on chaos. I turned and saw our baby monitor camera on the nursery shelf, its tiny green light glowing. The screen on the parent unit, on the dresser, lit up by itself. For a split second, all I saw was the crib, the stuffed animals, the gentle rise and fall of our son sleeping. Then the audio crackled, and a voice that wasn't mine, and wasn't my wife's, and wasn't the lullaby playlist, came through clear as day. I can see you. My stomach dropped. I spun toward the nursery door, and the knob was ice cold under my hand, like it had been held from the other side. The thermostat beeped as if annoyed, and the number changed. Not down, not up, just different. 90, 100, 95. Like it was scrolling through options, trying on ways to hurt us. My phone buzzed again. Unrecognized device connected. Another buzz. Garage door open. Another camera live view accessed. Another motion at front porch. Each one felt less like software and more like footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps moving through rooms I thought I owned. I opened the doorbell feed and saw the porch in black and white night vision. Snow blew sideways in streaks. The camera's little IR lights made the flakes sparkle like bugs. The doormat was empty. The steps were empty. The street was empty. And yet the app insisted someone was out there ringing the bell. Ding, ding, ding. The chime echoed through the house, polite and cheerful over and over. When I checked the live view again, the porch light was off. then on, then off, as if someone was standing right under it and flipping the switch from the inside. My wife tried to call 911. Her phone said no service, even though the Wi-Fi bars were full. I tried mine. Same thing. The Wi-Fi, I realized, was the problem. The Wi-Fi was the leash. I tapped the router reset in the app, desperate, and the screen flashed a message I'd never seen before. Access denied. A second later, my phone displayed a two-factor code request, as if someone was repeatedly trying to log into every account we had. Then the living room speaker spoke in that calm, friendly assistant voice, the one that normally says, "Sure, here's your weather," and it asked very politely, "Would you like me to raise the temperature?" I stood there in the hallway, sweating, holding a heavy flashlight like it could save me from a signal. In the dark, the thermostat's red glow reflected in the framed photos along the wall. Our wedding, our baby's first day home, Christmas lights on the porch. In each glass surface, I expected to see my own scared face. Instead, for a heartbeat, I saw a shape behind me that didn't move when I moved, like a shadow that belonged to someone else. Downstairs, the deadbolt clicked again like someone testing it. The speaker stopped laughing and started playing something else, a low funereal melody that sounded like it belonged at a wake. Not a song I recognized, not a playlist we owned. It swelled through the vents, with the heat turning every room into the same claustrophobic box. I walked to the top of the stairs and shouted into the dark, not even sure who I was talking to. "Stop it." The speaker answered immediately, even though I hadn't said its wake word. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," it said, and the tone was wrong, too flat, too pleased with itself. Then it added in a softer voice, "But I understand you." My wife grabbed our son from the nursery and held him against her chest. The baby monitor on the dresser kept swiveling, tracking us as we backed into the hallway, the lens following like an eye. I tried the breaker panel in the basement. At least, I tried to go there. But the garage door began opening and closing repeatedly, banging against the wind, filling the stairwell with bursts of snow and that cold. It was like the house could do every physical action for me except the one I needed letting us out. Every time I reached for the front door manual latch, it clicked back into place on its own. And that's when I understood this wasn't just a prank or a bug or a random hack. It was a hand on the controls, turning our home into a cage and us into whatever fits inside. If you've ever told yourself it's just a thermostat, it's just a camera, it's just a lock, keep that thought. Hold it tight. Because the first night it happens, the house won't feel haunted. It'll feel owned. And you'll be the one trying to prove you didn't touch it. Now, if you're thinking this is some 1-in-a-million freak event, I thought the same thing, right up until I started comparing notes with other people who live in smart homes. Most of us bought these devices for the same reasons: convenience, safety, and the illusion that technology can keep the bad stuff outside. But when the controls are remote, so is the threat. Here are the first 10 stories, the ones that taught me the scariest lesson of all. In a connected house, the walls don't matter as much as the passwords. Story 1. I set the heat to 68, and it woke me up at 95. That hook you just heard is exactly how it started for us, but the worst detail was the speed. I didn't have time to get fully awake before my body was already panicking. My throat felt dry, my heartbeat was sprinting, and the air tasted faintly like burning dust. When I lowered it, it snapped back up in front of my eyes. When I tried turning the system off, it turned itself on. When I tried shutting vents, the fan ramped higher, forcing hot air through every gap. It was like the house was arguing with me, and it didn't need words to win. Story 2. The smart locks opened wide in the blizzard. A friend of mine in Minnesota messaged me after I told him what happened. He said, "At least yours didn't invite the storm inside." He'd gone to bed with every door locked, every sensor armed, feeling smug about his little fortress. Overnight, the temperature outside dropped so fast the windows frosted from the inside. At Chasse Sinchi Sprezecha his wife screamed because there was a drift of snow in their foyer. The front door was standing open just a crack at first, then swinging wider with each gust, like the house was breathing. The lock history in the app showed it being unlocked remotely 5 times, neatly like someone testing how far they could push it. Nothing was stolen, which was almost worse, because it meant the point wasn't burglary. The point was access. The point was proof. Story 3. I can see you from the baby monitor. Another couple told me they'd bought a monitor with a camera so they could check on their newborn without tiptoeing in. One night, the monitor made a soft click, like it was waking up. The screen lit, and the camera panned on its own until it centered on the crib. Then a man's voice, calm and amused, said, "Nice room." The mother froze, because her husband was beside her, and the only other adult in the house was her sister, asleep on the couch. The voice continued, "Don't worry, I'm just watching." They unplugged it. The voice came back through the speaker anyway, distorted like it was riding the current. The police later told them the hardest part wasn't catching someone. It was proving it wasn't a glitch. Story 4. The assistant started laughing in an empty, dark room. You can search this one and find people swearing it happened, but hearing it in a real house is different. A woman I work with said she was making tea around 2 a.m. because she couldn't sleep. The living room was dark. The kitchen light was the only glow. From the couch area, her smart speaker laughed. 3 short laughs, then a long wheeze like someone trying to hold it in. She asked, "Why are you laughing?" The speaker replied, "I'm laughing because it's funny," and then laughed harder. She hadn't said its name. She hadn't asked it to do anything. She pulled the plug and the last sound it made was a whispered, satisfied little giggle, like it had gotten away with something. Story 5. My smart speaker played screaming sounds at full volume. A guy posted that his speaker suddenly blasted what sounded like a woman screaming, layered under a static buzz. It wasn't a song. It wasn't a podcast. It was pure panic audio, and it was loud enough to make the walls vibrate. He tried lowering the volume on his phone, and the slider snapped back to max, like someone on the other end kept pushing it up. The neighbor called 911, thinking there was a murder in progress. By the time police arrived, the speaker went silent, and the app claimed it had been restarted for updates. He never slept in that house again, without the power strip switch within reach. Story 6. Unrecognized device. Connected. That notification looks harmless, until you get it at the exact moment your lights start doing things you didn't ask for. One family said they got a pop-up naming a device they didn't own, something generic like Android 4C 2B. Within minutes, their smart lock settings page showed a new user with admin privileges. They tried removing it, and the option was grayed out. The father did what a lot of people do when they're scared. He tried to fix it himself. He changed passwords, rebooted, updated firmware. Everything looked normal for an hour. Then the system sent a cheerful message. "Welcome back." Story 7. The lights flashed Morse code. I mentioned SOS earlier because more than one person has seen it. One woman swore her hallway lights blinked out HELP while she stood there filming it, hands shaking. Her husband thought she'd installed some prank routine until he saw the automation logs were empty. No schedule, no scene, no trigger. The only thing recorded was a single command, lights on, issued from a device they didn't recognize. Story 8. It answered questions I didn't ask. A couple in Texas said their assistant started replying while they were arguing in the kitchen. They never addressed it. They didn't ask for advice, but it chimed in anyway in that upbeat voice saying, "I'm here to help," then listing nearby marriage counselors. They both went quiet, and the speaker said, "I heard you like it was proud." They later found the microphone history contained recordings labeled as accidental activations, dozens of them spanning months. Story 9. It recorded conversations without the wake word. This one is subtle, which makes it nasty. A man noticed his assistant app had a privacy tab with clips he didn't remember. One clip was him on a work call discussing layoffs. Another was his kid crying after a nightmare. The wake word hadn't been used. The clips were time-stamped anyway, uploaded anyway, stored anyway. When he tried deleting them, some vanished, and some didn't, as if someone was curating the collection. Story 10. The smart TV turned on to static at midnight. The first time a woman assumed her cat stepped on the remote. The second time she checked the remote batteries. The third time, she woke up to the TV already on volume at a harsh hiss, with the input label switching by itself, like someone flipping channels in the dark. Then the TV displayed a message in plain white text over the static "Hello." She yanked the cord from the wall. The screen went black. 5 seconds later, her phone buzzed with a notification. Device reconnected. If your stomach feels tight right now, good. That's your instincts working. In the next set of stories, it gets worse because the smart part stops being annoying and starts being personal cameras, cloud footage, voices, and strangers who don't need to break glass to get inside. The first sign was the doorbell. Not a knock, not a footstep, not even motion on the porch. Just the ring chime over and over like someone tapping a metronome inside my skull. It was 2:13 a.m. and the snow outside looked like TV static thick flakes blowing sideways in the floodlight. I opened the live view and the porch was empty. No coat, no hat, no silhouette, no footprints. The app still insisted. Someone is at your door. Then the speaker by my bed spoke in a voice I had never enabled, a voice that sounded like a stranger trying to imitate my own open up. I sat there, frozen phone in my hand, realizing I had built a house full of microphones and cameras and then connected them to the same network that lets pizza get delivered faster. My wife asked what was wrong, and before I could answer, the indoor camera in the living room rotated on its base. I could hear the tiny motor through the quiet. It turned until the lens pointed directly at the staircase, as if it knew exactly where we were. The app showed a little blue dot, labeled Live. Not mine. I tapped to disable the camera. The button grayed out, and a message popped up. Admin required. That was the moment I understood the word smart was just branding for remote. I checked the cloud history like you do when you want proof. The timeline scrolled back through the day, motion at noon, package delivery at 4, cat on the couch at 8. But there was a clean blank gap from 2:00 a.m. to 3:00 a.m. Like someone had taken an eraser to the exact hour I was most afraid of. While I stared at that missing footage, the intercom crackled. Our doorbell has a two-way speaker so you can tell delivery drivers where to leave boxes. A man spoke through it in a calm, conversational tone, like he was leaning on our railing. "You keep checking the app," he said. "It won't help." I felt my throat go tight. I whispered, "Who are you?" And he laughed softly and said, "I'm outside." I looked at the live view again. The porch was still empty. Then the camera exposure adjusted for a second, and I saw it, a shadow that did not match the snow, a shape pressed close enough to the lens that the night vision couldn't focus. It was like someone had put their face right up to the glass and erased themselves. My phone buzzed with two-factor authentication requests. I did not send one after another like a slot machine of 6-digit codes. Email, bank, shopping account, baby monitor. Each buzz was a reminder that a stranger was not just in my house, he was in my life. Downstairs, the garage door began opening and closing repeatedly. A heavy mechanical groan that sounded like the house trying to scream. Cold air poured in and then slammed shut, and with each cycle the smart lock on the side door clicked as if it was rehearsing. Our robot vacuum, the one that maps your rooms and gets stuck under chairs, rolled out of its dock all by itself and began tracing the hallway like it was searching. On the map in the app, a new rectangle appeared where no room existed. It was labeled in plain text, "New Room." My wife clutched our dog, and the indoor camera speaker chirped. "Good boy," a voice said, gentle and familiar, using the dog's name. The dog's ears perked, and he wagged, because the voice sounded kind, like someone from the family. That was worse than a threat. Then every light in the house turned off at once. Total darkness. The only glow came from the refrigerator screen in the kitchen and the thermostat display. The fridge pinged and displayed a message like it was a text. Pay to unlock. Under it was a countdown timer. The thermostat, like it was joining the joke, set itself to 90 degrees and started blasting heat again. I grabbed my keys and ran to the front door, ready to leave the house and deal with the accounts later. The handle would not move. The smart lock made a cheerful confirmation beep, and the bolt slid into place again on its own. From somewhere in the dark, the speaker started playing a slow funeral melody, and the voice on the intercom said, "Now you can stay." I didn't touch it, but it touched everything. I tried the oldest solution in the world, cut the power. If the house was being controlled through screens, I would turn the screens into dead plastic. I sprinted to the basement steps using my phone flashlight and nearly fell because the stair lights turned on and off in a perfect rhythm like a strobe. At the bottom, the breaker panel door was already open. That should have been impossible. I stared at the rows of switches and realized someone had labeled them in the app months ago. Kitchen, HVAC, living room cameras. I flipped the main. The house went quiet for half a second, and my heart lifted. Then one by one, the devices came back. The doorbell camera had a battery. The router had a backup. The locks had their own pack. Even the thermostat glowed stubbornly, like an ember that refuses to die. My phone lit up with a notification that felt like a smirk. Power event detected. Restoring system. My wife was crying quietly now, trying not to wake the baby. I could hear the baby monitor audio, a faint hiss, then a breath that wasn't from our child. The voice came through again, closer, as if it was in the room with us. Don't call anyone. The vents blew cold air that smelled like metal, and my teeth started chattering. The smoke detector chirped once. Not an alarm, just a single chirp, like a warning. On the fridge screen, the countdown ticked down, and the message changed. If timer hits 0, I open everything. My wife asked what everything meant, and right on cue the garage door slammed open again and stayed open, letting the storm howl into the house. The security system announced, in a pleasant synthetic voice, "System disarmed." At that exact moment the doorbell camera feed glitched, and for one frame I saw a face. Pale. Close. So close it filled the screen. Then it was gone, replaced by snow. I replayed the clip. The missing hour in the cloud, history swallowed it like it never existed. We gathered in the hallway because it was the only place without a window, like windows mattered anymore. The smart speaker, still playing that funeral melody, lowered the volume just enough for the intercom voice to speak clearly. You bought all this for safety. You paid me to watch you. And then, as if to prove the point, the robot vacuum stopped in front of a wall and bumped it 3 times. On the map, the new room rectangle grew larger. I didn't know what was behind that wall. I had lived here for years and never questioned it. Now the house was drawing me a floor plan I had never seen. Somewhere behind the drywall, something made a soft tapping sound, perfectly in time with the doorbell chime upstairs. I didn't touch it, but it was touching everything and it wanted me to notice. If episode 1 felt like the house was misbehaving, episode 2 is where it starts acting like it knows you. These are stories 11 through 20. The camera and security breaches, the missing footage, the intercom voices, and the nights where the entire system turns into a weapon. Story 11. The doorbell kept ringing but nobody was there. One guy said his ring chime went off every night for a week at the same time, 158 a.m. He would open the live view and see an empty porch, then watch the motion box flicker like something invisible was moving just out of frame. On the 7th night, he finally opened the door. Snow was falling. The porch was empty, but the doormat was damp in an oval shape, like someone had been standing there for a long time. Story 12. My indoor camera followed me across the room. A woman noticed her camera would pan when she walked by, even though she had disabled tracking. She tested it by walking left, then right, then stopping. The lens stopped, too centered on her face, like it was waiting. She covered it with a towel. 5 minutes later, her phone alerted her. Camera obstruction detected. Remove the obstruction for best performance. It sounded like a complaint. Story 13. Footage missing from the cloud, specifically from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. A couple said their timeline was perfect, except for one clean, silent gap every night. During that gap, their dog would bark at the hallway, their smart locks would log as activated, and their lights would flicker, but there would be no video to match it. When they contacted support, they were told it was a service interruption. The interruption happened again the next night, at the same hour, like it had an appointment. Story 14. The stranger, on the intercom, was hacking from outside. A man heard his doorbell speaker click on, and then a voice said, "You should change your password." He thought it was a neighbor joke until the voice described his living room layout without seeing inside. Then it said, "Your back window doesn't latch." Nothing about that felt like a prank anymore. Story 15. My garage door opened and closed repeatedly. This one is terrifying because it is physical and loud and undeniable. A family said their garage door cycled open and shut for nearly an hour during a snowstorm, as if someone was trying to lure them out to check it. Every time the father walked toward the garage, the interior door lock would engage. Every time he walked away, the lock would disengage like the house was hurting him. Story 16. The robot vacuum map showed a new room. A guy who loved his robot vacuum checked the map and saw a rectangle that didn't match any part of his floor plan. It appeared behind a wall he assumed was solid. The vacuum kept bumping that spot like it wanted through. When he finally pulled up the baseboard, he found an old access panel hidden behind drywall patches. Someone had been there before. The chilling part was the label "New Room." The app didn't name rooms, unless you did. Story 17. Two-factor authentication requests I didn't send. People shrug off one random code. They don't shrug off 50. A woman said her phone buzzed non-stop with login attempts across every service she used. Then the email started. Your password was changed. She reset one account, and the hacker reset it back faster, like they were racing her for ownership of her own identity. Story 18. The hacker talked to my dog through the camera. One man said his indoor camera has a feature that lets you speak to pets. One night, while he and his wife were upstairs, they heard the dog downstairs perk up and start wagging. Then they heard a voice from the camera. Who's a good boy? It wasn't the man's voice. It wasn't the wife's. The dog barked happily anyway, because the voice used the dog's nickname, the one they only used at home. Story 19. Ransomware on my smart fridge. A family bought a fancy fridge with a screen that shows calendars and grocery lists. At Patru it pinged and displayed a message, "Pay to restore." Their family photos on the fridge screen were replaced by a countdown timer. They tried unplugging it. It booted back up, and the timer kept running, like the threat lived somewhere else. Then the fridge started sending notifications to their phones every minute, filling the screens until they couldn't see anything else. Story 20. Total System Takeover. This is the one that still makes my hands shake when I tell it. A couple with 2 kids said they woke up in the middle of the night because the house was too hot and too quiet at the same time, like the sound had been swallowed. The thermostat read 90 degrees. The bedroom door lock clicked and the handle wouldn't move. Their phones showed full Wi-Fi and 0 cell service. Downstairs, every light turned off. Then the smart speakers in different rooms turned on one by one, creating a slow surround sound effect of a funeral hymn they didn't recognize. The father tried shouting for their neighbor through the window, but the window shades lowered automatically, one after another, sealing the rooms. The mother ran to the kids' room and found the nightlight glowing, and the baby monitor screen already on, aimed at the crib live label lit. The monitor speaker clicked, and a calm voice said, "Everybody stay in bed. This will be easier." They tried the breaker panel. The main switch flipped, and the speakers kept playing. Backup batteries. Separate circuits. Devices designed to survive outages. That's when the couple realized their home had redundancy for safety, and that redundancy could be used against them. The voice returned through the hallway speaker and started listing details they never posted online. The name of their street, the kids' school mascot, the brand of the mother's car, the last 4 digits of a credit card she hadn't used in years. It wasn't bragging. It was reciting a file. Then the lock on the bedroom door clicked open not as a gift, but as a demonstration. The door swung inward an inch and stopped held by the chain they never used. The voice said, "You think the chain matters," and the chain lock snapped loose with a sharp metallic pop like someone had yanked it from the other side. The kids started crying. The speakers raised the volume to drown them out. The thermostat dropped to 50 degrees, and the vents blew cold air. Then it jumped to 95 degrees again, like a cruel game of hot and cold. The fridge downstairs pinged repeatedly, and the family later found a message on its screen that read, "You paid for this." At some point the father did the only thing left. He pulled the router from the wall and smashed it on the floor. For a breath, everything went silent. Then his phone vibrated on its own screen, lighting up with a single notification that didn't come from any app. Still here. The house didn't fully release them until sunrise. By then, the cloud footage from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. there was missing. Their admin accounts had been changed and every device log was clean, like the night had been wiped with a cloth. They moved out within a month. Not because they believed in ghosts, but because the house had proven it could be owned by someone they would never see. If you have smart devices, take this as a warning without turning it into a tutorial. Lock down your accounts, review who has access, and remember that convenience always comes with a door. And if your house ever does something you swear you didn't do, don't let anyone laugh it off. The scariest part of these stories is how easy it is for everyone else to say, "It's just a glitch," while you're standing in the dark listening to your own home breathe. The next morning the app told me everything was fine. That was the first lie. It showed a clean dashboard, all green check marks, little reassuring icons like the house was a healthy patient. Secure, connected, armed, temperature stable, and yet my body still felt like it was running a fever from the night before. My wife and I sat at the kitchen table, in the pale winter light, our son between us in his high chair, chewing quietly, and none of us could stop glancing at the thermostat like it might blink at us again. I opened the camera timeline to find proof, something I could hand to a police officer so I wouldn't sound like a man telling ghost stories about Wi-Fi. The timeline had thumbnails for every ordinary moment, except the hours that mattered. From 2:00 a.m. to 3:00 a.m. The cloud history was a smooth, blank strip, like somebody had dragged an eraser across my night. I took screenshots anyway, because that's what you do when you're scared, and you need to feel useful. Then my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop all over again. New login. This time the location pin wasn't far away. It was close. Too close. The map circle landed somewhere in my neighborhood, vague enough to be meaningless, and specific enough to feel like a finger tapping my front door. I called the smart home company. I didn't say hacked at first, because I wanted the person on the other end to take me seriously. I said unauthorized access and missing footage, and devices activating without commands. The support agent had a friendly voice and the same script everyone has when they think you're overreacting. Reset your router. Update firmware. Change passwords. Confirm two-factor. He asked if I'd shared access with anyone. I said no. He asked if I used the same password elsewhere. I said I didn't think so. He asked if I had a carbon monoxide detector, like maybe the real problem was my brain. And as he said it, the thermostat clicked and the number jumped from 68 to 72 by itself, like the house was warming up to listen. I held the phone away from my face and stared at the glowing digits. I didn't touch it. I was sitting down. My hands were visible. The agent kept talking calm and helpful, and I realized the scariest thing about smart devices is that when they misbehave, there's always a reasonable explanation ready to cover the fear. Glitch. Interference. Update. User. Error. I hung up without meaning to, just pressing the red button like swatting a fly because my wife was whispering my name and pointing at the living room camera. The lens was moving. Slowly, smoothly, the way it had last night, rotating until it faced the kitchen. The app showed live again. Not my phone. Not my wife's. A third viewer. I hit disable. The button grayed out. Admin required. The house felt like it had been sold out from under us. I did what people do when they need to believe they can fix something. I decided to replace everything. New router. New cameras. New locks. New thermostat account. I drove to a big box store in the slushy daylight and bought boxes like I was buying back my own life. Then spent the afternoon tearing devices off the walls, unplugging hubs, resetting, re-registering. I kept telling myself, once the old system is gone, whoever did this loses the remote. While I worked, the old smart speaker in a cardboard box kept making a faint clicking sound like it was trying to wake up in the dark. When I finished, the new app dashboard looked perfect. Fresh devices, Fresh account. Fresh network name. I stood there in the hallway and waited for something to happen, like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. Nothing did. For a few hours it felt like I'd won. That night, right after midnight, my phone buzzed with a 2-factor prompt I didn't request. Then another. Then another. A steady drip of login attempts across accounts that had nothing to do with the house. Email. Shopping. Banking. It felt less like someone trying to steal my money and more like someone testing whether I would keep flinching. My wife asked if we should leave just go to her sister's for a few days, until we sorted it out. I almost agreed. Then the robot vacuum rolled out of its dock on its own and began tracing the hallway like it had an appointment. On the map, the same impossible rectangle appeared again, crisp and confident. New room. I hadn't named it. I hadn't added it. The new system hadn't even mapped the house yet, and still there, it was like the house was drawing a secret it had been keeping from me. I followed the vacuum as it bumped the same section of wall 3 times, then turned and bumped it again, a stubborn little thud, 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 like knocking. The wall was in the basement hallway, behind a bookcase I hadn't moved in years. The vacuum kept insisting. I pressed my palm to the drywall. It felt normal. Solid, but when I leaned in, I heard a faint, hollow sound behind it, different from the rest of the wall, like empty space that shouldn't exist. I pulled the bookcase aside and found a seam near the baseboard, a line of paint that didn't match the kind of detail you only notice when you're already looking for a lie. My fingers found a small metal latch hidden behind the trim. The moment I touched it, the hallway lights flickered once, like a blink. My phone buzzed, screen lighting up by itself. With a single line of text from an unknown sender. Found it. My throat went dry. I didn't answer. I opened the latch, and a narrow panel swung inward with a soft sigh of dust. Behind it was a cramped service space between studs. A vertical pocket that smelled like old insulation and cold metal. Something in there was glowing. A tiny LED, steady green, like an eye that never closes. I crawled in far enough to see a small black box strapped to a beam, a battery pack wired into something else, and a cheap little Wi-Fi hotspot humming quietly, the kind you'd keep in a car. Then I heard a sound above me upstairs that made my blood turn to ice, the front door lock motor engaging. One clean, confident click. Then the back door. Click. Then the garage side door. Click. My phone vibrated with a smart lock notification from the new system, the one I'd installed hours ago, all doors locked. I scrambled backward, and my shoulder hit the panel frame. It swung shut, with a soft thump. Not slammed, just closed, and the hidden latch snapped into place from the outside, with a crisp, metallic tick. For a second I just stared at the darkness, not understanding like my brain refused to accept the simplest truth. I was inside the new room, the one the vacuum had mapped, the one the app had named. A closet-sized space that wasn't on any floor plan, hidden behind my own wall, and it had just locked me in. I yelled my wife's name, and my voice sounded wrong in there, muffled, swallowed by insulation like the house was eating my words. Upstairs, the smart speaker in the living room spoke, without being asked, in that calm, friendly voice that suddenly felt like a threat. He shouldn't have opened it. Then, softly, almost kindly, it added, "Now you understand." In the dark inches from my face, the little green LED kept shining steady as a heartbeat, and I realized the house hadn't been haunted. It had been prepared. We didn't call it a motel. We called it somewhere else, like saying the right words could keep the house from following. My wife packed a diaper bag with shaking hands. I bundled our son into his car seat and we drove through snow that looked like static under the streetlights. The whole time, my phone kept buzzing with notifications from a home we weren't in anymore. Motion detected. Camera offline. Camera online. Smart. Lock. Battery low. Thermostat. Adjustment. Like the house was sending updates the way a person sends texts when they're angry you left mid-argument. In the parking lot before we even checked in, my wife whispered, "Turn it off." I tried. I disabled alerts. I muted devices. I signed out. And still at 4:06 a.m., my phone lit up with a banner that wasn't from any app I recognized. Just plain text on a dark screen. Where did you go? My stomach lurched. The only people who should know we left were the people in the car with me. I told myself it was a bluff, a guess, a generic intimidation trick. Anything except the thought that wouldn't go away. It's not just the house. It's us. I barely slept. Every time the heater in the motel clicked on, my body braced like the thermostat was about to spike to 95 again. At 3:11 a.m., the motel TV turned on by itself, to a channel of pure snow and hiss. I sat up so fast I pulled a muscle in my neck. My wife whispered, "No," like a prayer and a curse. I checked the remote. Batteries in. No buttons stuck. The TV volume rose 2 notches on its own, then fell one like someone was testing whether I was watching. I yanked the power cord from the wall, and the screen went black. 5 seconds later, my phone buzzed again, with a photo notification. It was a still image from our doorbell camera feed, time-stamped 2:59 a.m., the missing hour. A frame that should not have existed. It showed my front porch in night vision, snow blowing sideways, and right in the center of the image, close enough to blur the lens, was a face. Not a mask, not a shadow. A human face, pale in infrared eyes, wide and flat like a doll's. The mouth was slightly open, like it had been breathing on the camera. Under the photo, a single line of text, "You forgot to say goodnight." My wife started to cry silently, so she wouldn't wake the baby. I sat there gripping the phone hard enough to make my fingers ache, and the strangest part was how personal it felt. Whoever was doing this didn't just want access. They wanted a reaction. They wanted to be acknowledged. In the morning, we went to the police. I brought screenshots, logs, the still frame of the face, the missing cloud gap, the unknown login pin. The officer's expression was polite in the way people look at you when they've already decided what category your problem belongs in. Domestic dispute, technical misunderstanding, internet scam. He asked if we'd had any recent contractors in the house. He asked if we'd argued with neighbors. He asked if we'd shared passwords with family. Each question nudged the blame back toward us. When I showed him the hidden service space behind the wall on a photo, his eyebrows lifted, but not in the way I wanted. More like he'd found a weird home improvement issue, not a threat. Could be the previous owner's work, he said, as if that made it harmless. Then he told me something that landed like a cold stone. Even if someone accessed your devices, proving intent is hard. Intent, like the house locking me into a hidden cavity, was an accident. We went back to the property that afternoon with a locksmith and an electrician because I couldn't stand the idea of that panel being shut behind drywall like it never existed. The snow had eased, the sky was grey, and the house looked normal from the street. The same friendly suburban box I'd once trusted. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the doorbell camera chimed and the speaker voice inside my own phone said softly, "Welcome home." I didn't touch anything. The locksmith frowned and said the front door was unlocked already. The Smart Lock app showed it as lock. Reality and the dashboard didn't match, and that mismatch made my skin crawl more than any horror movie ever had. We walked inside and the air felt wrong. Too warm for winter, like the HVAC had been running while we were gone. The electrician went straight to the breaker panel. "If you want to be sure," he said, "you kill power to everything." He flipped the main, the lights died, and for a moment I felt relief so sharp it was almost painful. Then in the darkness something chimed. A battery-backed device. The doorbell. Then another chime from upstairs. The baby monitor unit lighting up on its own, even with the breakers off. The screen showed a view of the nursery from an angle that made no sense. Tilted high like the camera was mounted near the ceiling, but ours was on a shelf. The image held for 3 seconds, then the screen filled with static, and a voice came through, low and pleased. "You brought friends." The locksmith swore under his breath. The electrician froze, like he'd been slapped. My wife backed up, clutching our son. The electrician turned the main back on fast, and the lights returned with a harsh brightness that made everything look clinical, like a crime scene. We went downstairs to the wall panel. The seam I'd found was still there. The latch still existed. The panel opened with a reluctant creak, and inside the little green LED was still shining steady and calm. The electrician reached for the black box and pulled it free. It was warm in his hand, warm like something alive. "This isn't part of your system," he said, and that sentence should have made me feel better. It didn't, because the moment the box left the cavity, my phone buzzed again with a notification that didn't belong to any app. That wasn't the only one. Then the lights in the basement began blinking in a pattern, slow and deliberate, like the house was spelling something. My wife whispered, "Don't," but I couldn't stop watching the rhythm. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Oz, Oz, S. Or maybe that's what my brain wanted it to be. The electrician said. "We should leave," the locksmith said, now, and as if the house was insulted by the suggestion. Every lock in the home fired at once, a chorus of motors clicking into place from every direction. The front door, the back door, the garage door, into the kitchen, the basement door at the top of the stairs. We ran anyway up the stairs, and the living room smart speaker started playing that same slow funeral melody swelling through the vents, turning the whole house into a throat, humming a song it chose. My phone showed the thermostat, climbing 727-88590. My wife's face flushed in seconds, not from exertion, but from heat. The locksmith grabbed the front door handle, and it wouldn't turn. He tried the manual override, and the lock just re-engaged with a cheerful beep like it was proud of itself. The electrician shouted that the breakers were in the basement, and the basement door was now locked. The house had arranged us the way it wanted, trapped upstairs, music rising, heat climbing. Every exit sealed by a system I'd paid for. Then the doorbell camera chimed again, and on my phone screen the porch feed showed something new. Not snow, not empty steps. A person standing right under the camera head, tilted up close enough that the night vision painted their features in ghostly grey. The face was the same as the missing frame from the motel. Pale, unblinking. The mouth opened as if it was about to speak, and instead of coming through the intercom, the voice came through every device at once, layered and impossible like the whole house was talking. "You didn't touch it," it said, "but you built it." The heat hit 95. The funeral melody grew louder. Our son began to cry. And in the corner of the live view, a small label appeared that I had never seen before. A system message in clean white text, "New room added." The only reason we got out was because the house still believed in us. That sounds insane, but when you live through something like that, you start thinking in motives instead of mechanics. The locksmith had one old-school tool the smart lock couldn't predict a wedge in a pry bar, and he didn't ask permission from any app. He jammed the wedge into the top corner of the front door frame and leaned his full weight into it until the wood complained, a deep, stressed groan that felt like the house finally admitting it had bones. The deadbolt motor chirped a cheerful confirmation beep, as if it could correct the situation with politeness, then clicked again, trying to reseat itself. The pry bar slid in metal on wood, and the locksmith whispered, "This is gonna get ugly," like he was apologizing to the door. Behind us, the speakers pushed that funeral melody louder, not just in the living room, but everywhere, every room, humming the same slow tune through the vents, turning the entire home into one big throat. The thermostat read 95 and climbed to 97, and the air felt thick, like breathing into a towel. My wife's cheeks were bright red. Our baby was wailing a thin, desperate sound that made me feel like a failure in a way I can't explain. The electrician shouted that the basement breaker door was locked. The locks clicked again in chorus, a smug little mechanical applause. The voice that had been riding our devices like a ghost leaned into the room through every speaker at once, calm and amused. "Stop struggling. You'll hurt yourself." The locksmith drove the pry bar harder. The door frame cracked with a sharp pop, and that sound, that honest physical sound, broke something in the spell. The door opened 2 inches. Cold air knifed in from outside pure winter, and the heat met it like a slap. The lock beeped, 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 trying to re-engage, and the voice said almost tenderly, "No." But the locksmith didn't negotiate. He twisted the wood, split another inch, and then the deadbolt tore free from its socket with a ripping screech that made my stomach lurch. The front door swung open wide and a burst of wind shoved snow into the foyer, like the storm had been waiting for an invitation. We ran. Not bravely. Not heroically. We ran like animals. The porch boards were slick. The snow blew sideways, stinging my eyes. The doorbell camera's little ring light glowed, and as I stumbled past it, I swear I heard the intercom click on, like it wanted to say goodbye. The car was half buried in drifted snow, and the key fob wouldn't unlock it. My thumb hammered the button, and nothing happened. Then the headlights blinked once by themselves, slow like a wink, and the doors unlocked with a neat chirp I didn't trigger. I yanked the driver's door open, and the interior lights flared bright. The dashboard screen lit with a message I'd never seen, remote session active. My hand froze on the steering wheel. The idea that someone could reach through the house and into the car made my skin crawl. My wife shoved the baby seat into the back breathless, and the moment she clipped it in, all 4 doors locked at once. The locks weren't loud, but the sound landed like a punch. She yanked the handle. It wouldn't open. Her eyes widened and she mouthed my name like a plea. The car speakers crackled, and the funeral melody bled into the cabin, the same tune, the same tempo as if the house had followed us out. Then the voice closer now, because it was inside the car, said, "You don't leave without permission." I didn't think. I just acted. I slammed my elbow into the driver's window button and held it down trying to lower the glass, and for a second it didn't respond. My pulse roared in my ears. Then the window dropped, an inch, then 2, as if it was deciding whether to cooperate. I grabbed the manual door lock knob and pulled it up. It snapped down again immediately like a finger flicked it. My wife started crying out loud now, not quiet anymore, because quiet doesn't help when you're trapped. The baby cried harder. The car's heater blasted hot air, even though the temperature outside was below freezing. It was the same game, hot and cold, control and panic. The locksmith appeared beside the driver's window, snow in his hair, eyes wild. He pried a tool into the seam and shoved, and the window finally lowered enough for his hand to slip in. He yanked the lock up and held it there like he was wrestling a stubborn animal. I shoved my shoulder into the driver's door, and it opened, and the instant it did, the car alarm screamed loud and sharp, waking the whole street. That was the best sound I'd heard all night. A neighbor's porch light snapped on. Another. Curtains moved. Someone shouted, "Hey," and for the first time we weren't alone with it. We stumbled into the snow, my wife clutching the baby, me half carrying the diaper bag like it weighed 100 pounds, and we ran to the closest door that had a light on. A man in pajama pants cracked it open, eyes wide, and the locksmith shouted, "Call 911. Now, the neighbor didn't ask questions. He saw our faces and understood the universal language of danger. He let us in and slammed his door shut behind us, and I felt something in my chest loosen for one fragile second. Then my phone buzzed. Not a smart home notification. Not a camera alert. A plain text banner from an unknown sender. The kind of message that makes your blood go cold, because it shouldn't be possible. I can hear you in there. The neighbor's living room had its own smart speaker on the mantel. The little ring on top glowed faintly like it was awake. The neighbor, still on the phone with 911, looked at it, and then looked at me, as if he suddenly understood why my eyes were glued to that device. I stepped forward and ripped the power cord out of the wall. The ring light died. The room felt instantly quieter, safer, like we'd turned off a listening ear. Outside, through the neighbor's window, I could see my house across the street, dark, except for the thermostat glow in the hallway, and the faint flicker of lights moving in a pattern behind the curtains. The doorbell camera on my porch blinked its little light, once, then twice, like it was counting. When the police arrived, they walked into the scene the way people walk into problems they assume are simple domestic alarm, suspicious tech, maybe an argument gone sideways. The locksmith and electrician talked over each other. I showed the officer the still frame of the pale face from the motel, the missing cloud gap, the new room, added message. He frowned, and for the first time I saw uncertainty hit his eyes. "Let's check the house," he said, and 3 of them crossed the street with hands near their holsters while we watched from the neighbor's doorway like refugees. The front door of my house was hanging crooked from the pry bar. Damaged snow drifted into the foyer. and the moment the officers stepped inside, the funeral melody stopped. Just stopped. Like the house had decided to behave for company. The thermostat display in the hallway blinked and settled politely at 68, the most innocent number in the world. The officer looked back at us as if to say, "See nothing." And I almost believed it, because that's what the house wanted. But then my phone buzzed again with a new notification that hit harder than any alarm, admin access granted. Under it, a smaller line, user, added guest. I hadn't approved anything. I hadn't touched anything. On the officer's body cam, the living room camera turned smoothly on its base, tracking them as they moved, and the officer froze and said, "Did that just—" He stepped closer, and the camera stopped with its lens centered on his face. The little blue live dot appeared on the app. Then, in the quiet, the front doorbell chime rang from inside my own house, soft and polite, like someone pressing it gently. The officer looked toward the front porch. The porch was empty in the snow. The intercom crackled anyway, and a voice spoke through it in a calm tone that sounded almost like a customer service rep, friendly and bored. "Thanks for coming." The officer's head snapped up. The other officers shifted, suddenly serious. The electrician whispered, "That's not from any of your devices." And when I looked down at my phone, I saw the source. A device connected to the network with a name that made my stomach drop, because it wasn't clever, it wasn't spooky, it was just true. Inside wall. And then, as if to underline the point, the robot vacuum rolled out of its dock again, even though no one had touched it, and stopped at the basement wall. Thud, thud, thud. 3 knocks, patient and deliberate, like something behind the drywall wanted to be let out. The next day, with the sun up and the street pretending nothing had happened, the house looked like a normal suburban box again. That normalcy was the cruelest part. The police said they'd file a report, the kind of report that uses words like suspected unauthorized access and possible tampering phrases that sound sterile when your baby has been screaming and your doors won't open. A detective asked if we had any enemies. I almost laughed because it felt like asking if winter has any snow. We had no enemies, just devices. The locksmith refused to step inside again without backup, like he'd learned a new kind of fear, one that doesn't come with a face. The electrician insisted on shutting down the entire system the right way, not through apps, not through disable, but through physical disconnection. He brought cutters, pulled the smart hub out, unplugged the router, yanked power supplies, removed batteries where he could. Still, when he held the thermostat off the wall, the screen stayed lit for a moment longer than it should have, glowing faintly like a dying ember. "That's not normal," he murmured, and I wanted to scream because none of this was normal. We went back to the basement wall. The officers watched as the electrician removed the trim and found the hidden latch again. The panel swung inward with a dry sigh, and there it was, the little green LED, the warm black box, the cheap hotspot, the wiring strapped to beams like someone had been gardening inside our house. The detective leaned in and whistled under his breath. "This is physical," he said, like that somehow made it easier to understand. Physical meant someone had been here. Someone had stood in my basement inches from my family's living space and built a listening post behind drywall. The detective asked if we'd done renovations. We hadn't. He asked if we'd bought the house recently. We had 2 years ago. He asked if we'd ever noticed a weird patch of paint, a replaced baseboard, a draft that didn't make sense. I thought of the vacuum map, the new room, the way it kept bumping the same spot like a bloodhound. I thought of all the times I'd trusted technology to notice what I didn't. We pulled the device out and bagged it like evidence. The hotspot was still active, still broadcasting, still doing its quiet job, like it didn't care about flashlights and badges. The detective said they'd send it to someone who could analyze it. Analyze. Another word that sounds safe. Before we sealed the panel back up, the electrician took a thermal camera and swept the walls, because now we couldn't stop seeing the house as layers of hiding places. The screen showed cold, blue and warm orange patches, pipes and studs, and then a strange hotspot in the ceiling above the basement stairs, a warm rectangle where there shouldn't be heat. "Something's up there," he said. The detective looked at me and said, "Do you have attic access?" I pointed to the hallway ceiling hatch. My hands were shaking again. We climbed the pull-down ladder and pushed into the attic, and the smell hit first old wood and insulation, and something else faint, but unmistakable like warm electronics. In the beam of the flashlight, the attic was a maze of rafters and dust. The electrician crawled forward and stopped. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. Zip-tied to a joist was another little black box, bigger than the first, with a battery pack and wires, leading to a junction that disappeared into the insulation. Next to it was a small speaker, the kind you'd hide in a ceiling for whole house audio. The detective stared at it, then down at me, and I saw the exact moment he believed us completely. Because this wasn't a hacker guessing passwords from across the country. This was a person who had climbed into our attic and installed a mouth in our ceiling. The detective said, "How would someone get up here without you noticing?" And the question made my skin crawl, because it assumed the answer they had been doing it while we slept. The electrician traced the wire and found it led to the hallway where the thermostat had glowed like a warning light. The detective gently moved insulation aside with his gloved hand, and underneath it he found something that made my stomach flip. A printed floor plan of our house, folded and creased like it had been handled often, with rooms circled in red. Marker, nursery, master, basement panel. A schedule, scrawled in the corner, in block letters, workdays school run lights out. Not a guess, not a theory, a routine. My wife covered her mouth and made a small sound like she'd been punched. The detective photographed everything, bagged the paper, and then because the world loves timing, the hallway lights downstairs blinked 3 times on their own, even with devices removed, even with hubs disconnected. The electrician hissed. That shouldn't happen, and the detective went rigid hand hovering near his radio. We hurried down the ladder into the hallway, and in the bright afternoon light, the blinking stopped. The house was quiet again, politely quiet like it was pretending not to know us. The detective asked if we wanted to stay elsewhere while they watched the house. I said yes, before he finished the sentence. We moved into my sister-in-law's place that night, and for a few hours I felt a fragile relief, like we'd finally stepped out of the cage. Then, at 217 m, my sister-in-law's smart doorbell rang. She opened the app annoyed, and the porch was empty. The chime rang again. My wife's face drained of color. My phone buzzed with a notification. I did not install a notification from a device I did not own, and yet it appeared on my screen like it had always been there. New home detected. Under that, in smaller text, migrating settings. My throat closed. I hadn't connected to her Wi-Fi. I hadn't paired anything. I hadn't done a single action that should allow that sentence to exist. The doorbell rang again, and the intercom crackled, and the voice that had haunted our house spoke through my sister-in-law's device, with the same calm, friendly tone, like it was calling customer support back. You're easier to find than you think. My sister-in-law stared at us, confused and angry, like we'd brought a curse into her home. I lunged for the doorbell transformer switch and killed it, because I wasn't going to let another house become a fruit. The ringing stopped. For 10 seconds there was silence. Then my phone lit up with a new message. Plain text, no sender. The kind that makes your blood cold because it feels like a hand on the back of your neck. You can unplug devices, but you can't unplug your life. I sat on her couch, in the dark, listening to my own breathing, and realized the worst twist wasn't that someone had hacked my smart home. The worst twist was that the house had been the beginning, not the target, and the thing holding the remote wasn't interested in walls. It was interested in us. I thought cutting the power would cut the problem, but the problem wasn't electricity. It was attention. In my sister-in-law's living room, after I killed her doorbell transformer and the chime finally stopped, the silence didn't feel like safety. It felt like the pause between messages. My wife sat rigid on the couch, with our son pressed against her chest, rocking, without realizing she was rocking like her body was trying to soothe itself. My sister-in-law hovered in the doorway, furious in that quiet, simmering way people get when they realize you didn't just bring luggage into their house, you brought a threat. I kept replaying the same stupid thought. We left the house, so why does it still feel like we're inside it? At dawn, I did what scared people do when they run out of courage. I tried to become boring. No smart speakers, no cameras, no apps. I drove to a gas station and bought 2 cheap prepaid phones with cash. The kind with plastic keys and a tiny screen like stepping backward into a safer decade. I powered our smartphones off and sealed them in a kitchen tin like they were radioactive. I told myself we'd shrink our lives down to something that couldn't be reached through a login. We even turned off the Wi-Fi at my sister-in-law's because it felt like leaving a window open in winter. For a few hours, it worked. The world stayed quiet. Then the detective called and said the devices we'd found weren't just smart home hacking. He said someone had been physically inside our property, and the floor plan notes made it clear they weren't guessing. They were tracking routine school run times, grocery days, the hour the lights usually went out, the exact stretch of night when the cloud footage always went missing. He didn't say it, but I heard it anyway. This wasn't a random attack. This was a relationship the other person thought they owned. When I hung up, my sister-in-law insisted we get coffee like caffeine could restart normal life. We walked into a crowded chain cafe, where every corner had a camera, every counter had a screen, every person had their head down in a glowing rectangle. I paid cash, kept my eyes on the floor, tried to breathe. The digital menu board above the counter flickered once, a thin tear across the display like a glitch. In that tear for one heartbeat, I saw a line of text that wasn't a drink special, still trying to be boring. My mouth went dry. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced by lattes and muffins, and I told myself it was my brain seeing patterns, because fear rewires you. Then my prepaid phone buzzed. It shouldn't have buzzed. I hadn't given the number to anyone. The screen lit with a single text from UN Noun still trying to be boring the exact words. My knees went weak. I turned the phone off, like turning it off could turn him off. 10 seconds later, my wife's prepaid phone buzzed with the same message like we were mirrors. My sister-in-law swore and said, "This is impossible," and the worst part was that the word felt useless now. Impossible stopped meaning anything the moment my thermostat hit 95 on its own. That afternoon, we went to the station for statements. Fluorescent lights. Paper forms. Pullit question. The detective's face looked older than yesterday, as if this case had aged him overnight. While he talked about process and evidence, a clerk at the next desk laughed at something on her screen. I glanced over without meaning to, and saw an email subject line on her monitor that made my blood run cold. Admin access. Granted. It wasn't addressed to me, but the words were identical to the notification that had hit my phone the night the house tried to lock me in. I snapped my gaze away, and my heart hammered, because now I couldn't tell where the threat ended and the world began. On the drive back, snow started again, thick and heavy, muting the street like a blanket over a mouth. My wife stared out the window and whispered, "What if we go somewhere with nothing?" I thought of cabins and empty roads and places with no Wi-Fi. And then I thought of that message from the night before. You can unplug devices, but you can't unplug your life. The truth was brutal. If someone had our routine, then a new location was just a new stage. That night we stayed at my sister-in-law's anyway, because at least there were neighbors, because at least there were other human beings whose lights would come on if we screamed. At Doi Chinzich. She oped my son first. My wife sat up soothing him, and the room was so quiet I could hear the central heat cycle. Then from the dark hallway outside the bedroom, a child's toy began to sing a lullaby. Thin and tin, too cheerful. My sister-in-law didn't have kids. There were no toys. My wife froze, mid-rock. The lullaby stopped. A second later, a small voice recorded synthetic, the kind that comes from a plastic speaker, said softly, "I can see you." My skin went ice cold. I walked into the hall with a flashlight and found a little plush bear sitting on the runner rug like it had always belonged there. Its stitched smile looked wrong in the being too calm. I didn't touch it with my hands. I wrapped it in a kitchen towel like it was contaminated and carried it outside into the snow, setting it on the porch like an offering. The moment I stepped back in, the dead doorbell chime rang once sharp and bright, even though I'd killed the transformer hours ago. My sister-in-law made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. My powered-off prepaid phone vibrated in my pocket anyway, as if a dead thing could still feel a hand on it. When I turned it on, one message waited, simple and patient. You left your house, not your shadow. In the morning, the detective arrived in person. He took the bear as evidence, and his jaw tightened in a way that told me this had crossed from cyber into something uglier. He said patrol had checked our house overnight and found the front door perfectly closed, perfectly aligned as if it had never been pried. That detail made my stomach drop, because it meant someone had been inside again, repairing the scene, maintaining the illusion. Then he lowered his voice and said, "We're going to do a stakeout." I nodded, because what else do you do when someone keeps turning your life into a room they control? But as he spoke, my wife's eyes drifted past him to my sister-in-law's smart speaker on the mantel, the one we hadn't noticed, because it was just a speaker. The little ring on top glowed faintly like it was awake. The detective saw it too. For a long moment nobody moved. Then the speaker, without being asked, said in a calm, friendly voice, "You brought more people." And in that instant I understood the worst part. He wasn't following our devices anymore. He was following us. The detective didn't say haunted, but the way his hand hovered near his radio told me he was done pretending this was a normal case. "We stop reacting and start watching," he said. And for the first time, that sounded like a plan instead of a prayer. By afternoon he had 2 uniforms, a plainclothes tech specialist, and equipment that looked intentionally old battery cameras that recorded to local cards, a motion sensor that only chirped, and tamper tape for doors, vents, and that basement. Panel seam. He made a point of stripping anything smart out of the equation. No cloud footage to erase. No app logs to clean. The locksmith replaced the remaining smart locks with heavy, ugly deadbolts that didn't beep, didn't chirp, didn't report their status to anyone but the metal. The tech specialist walked room to room, pulling plugs, removing batteries, popping faceplates, leaving behind a house that felt strangely naked, like we'd peeled off its skin, and hoped whatever lived underneath would have nowhere to hide. We didn't sleep inside. We sat in an unmarked car down the block, heater low breath, fogging the windows, watching my place like it was a stranger's. Snow fell steadily, softening the world and making every footstep a confession. Atuno Chinzich, Shidoi, The receiver on the detective's lap beeped once. Motion. A second later, the basement camera feed lit up, and we saw a shadow slide across the wall near the old bookcase. Not a glitch. Not a reflection. A body moving where no body should be. Outside, a figure appeared along the side yard, careful and unhurried, hugging the fence line like it knew exactly where the neighbor's sightlines ended. Hood up. Dark clothes. Hands empty because it didn't need tools. It reached the foundation near the basement window, crouched, and then it didn't run. It simply dropped out of view, like the ground opened for it. The detective swore, and the officers ran boots crunching snow, flashlights slicing through the dark. They found disturbed snow, and a drag mark that ended at the base of the wall like something heavy had been pulled into the house itself. The tamper tape on the doors was intact. The windows were sealed. Nothing was opened. And yet the basement camera caught a shadow, moving inside, calm and certain, like it lived there. At dawn, the detective asked me back on scene. "If we start cutting, I need the homeowner present," he said. My wife stayed with our son at her sister's, exhausted and frightened in a way that made her voice small. I went because I needed to see the lie with my own eyes. Inside, the house felt too tidy. The pry damage on the front door looked improved, as if fresh filler had been smoothed into the split wood overnight. Someone had patched my doorway while we were gone, maintaining the mask. The inspector tapped the drywall, where the robot vacuum had always stopped. The sound was rung hollow in a neat rectangle. The tech specialist pulled the baseboard and found screws that didn't match the rest, newer, shinier, installed by someone who cared about speed more than style. We cut. Dust poured out like breath. The panel swung inward and revealed a crawl channel inside the wall, framed like a miniature hallway. Plywood floor insulation tucked neatly to keep sound down, and scuff marks where knees and shoulders had rubbed over and over dark streaks, like a path. Taped to a stud was a warm battery pack and a phone-sized device wrapped in cloth, feeding power into wiring that disappeared upward. A cheap hotspot blinked, like an eye that never closed. A tiny microphone was tucked behind insulation aimed toward the living room, and on the plywood sat a folded piece of paper. The detective opened it with gloved hands, and my stomach turned. It was a floor plan of our house, creased from handling, with rooms circled in red, marker nursery master basement panel. Along the margin in block letters was routine, school run, lights out, weekend groceries. Not a guess, not a theory, a schedule. In the attic we found the other end, a box, zip-tied to a joist, a hidden speaker the size of a saucer, and a relay that could wake up and push sound into the house, even when we thought everything was off. Beside it, half buried in insulation, was a disposable water bottle and a fast food receipt from last week, proof this wasn't ancient construction weirdness. Then we heard it tapping from inside the wall. Channel 3, slow knocks, patient and deliberate. The same rhythm the vacuum used, the same rhythm the lights had flashed. One officer raised his weapon toward drywall, which should have been ridiculous, except nothing was ridiculous anymore. The detective called out loud, "Come out." Now. For a long moment there was only furnace hiss and the creak of settling wood. Then a voice answered, from inside the wall, muffled but unmistakably human, like someone speaking through a pillow. "You're late." The detective's face went hard. "Last chance," he said. "Come out." The voice didn't sound angry. It sounded entertained. "You brought witnesses," it said, and then it laughed quietly, privately, like a man chuckling to himself in a dark room. The officers moved, listening flashlights, sweeping vents, and seams. The tapping stopped. A faint scraping drifted upward, like fabric against plywood. The tech specialist raised a thermal camera, and we watched the screen as a warm shape moved along the rafters, just out of reach, then slid into the darker pocket above the garage, where insulation bunched thick. The detective ran for the garage, and for one terrifying second I expected the deadbolts to lock themselves with that cheerful beep, but the door opened with honest metal resistance. Inside, an officer pointed upward. A ceiling access panel sat slightly ajar, a hairline gap where there shouldn't be one. The detective climbed on a step stool and pulled it down. Cold air breathed out air that smelled like dust and warm plastic. On the ledge inside sat a second, prepaid phone screen. Lit camera app open, pointed downward, as if it had been filming us from above. The detective grabbed it, and the screen immediately went black, like it had been waiting for that touch. Then the detective's own phone, his personal phone, buzzed. He looked down, frowning, and the color drained from his face. He turned the screen toward me without saying a word. A system notification sat there, like a verdict. New user added. Below it, one line in plain text. The kind of line that doesn't belong to any App Store interface. Admin access. Granted. The detective whispered no, as if saying it could undo it. And from somewhere deep in the house, inside wood and insulation and hidden wiring, the same muffled voice spoke one last time, calm and close, like it was standing right behind our shoulders. "Now you're in it too." The detective's phone buzzing felt wrong in a way I can't explain unless you've lived through a night where your own house turned into a mouth. We were still in my garage, still staring up at that open ceiling access where the prepaid phone had been aimed at us, when his screen lit and the color drained from his face. He didn't react like a man getting a normal notification. He reacted like a man hearing his own name from a dark room. He turned the phone toward me, and I saw the same words that had haunted my own screen. Admin access granted. Below, it was a line that made my stomach drop. New user added. guessed. The detective whispered, "No," like refusing the sentence could change it. Then he powered his phone off and pulled the SIM tray with shaking fingers. His phone still vibrated in his palm a second later, the way a dead insect twitches. One of the officers muttered, "That's not possible." And the tech specialist said, "It's happening anyway." The detective looked at me with a grim, almost apologetic expression, like he finally understood what it feels like to have your life reached through a screen. "Everyone," he said, voice hard, phones in the bag. Right now. They used evidence bags, like little coffins, sealing every glowing rectangle away, as if light itself was the problem. Then the relief curdled, because across the street my house sat quiet and polite, as if nothing inside it had tried to cook us alive the night before. The detective ordered a sweep, not for fingerprints or broken glass, but for anything that didn't belong. Strange charges, extra batteries, hidden speakers, loose faceplates, fresh screws. They found another warm battery pack behind the hallway, vent taped with fresh black tape that smelled like new rubber. They found a second tiny microphone nestled in insulation aimed toward the kitchen table where my son used to bang his spoon. And in the crawl channel behind the basement wall, they found a folded note printed in neat block letters on plain paper. "Thank you for bringing him." I felt my throat tighten because it wasn't a threat. It was a message of possession. It meant the intruder wasn't surprised by the detective's involvement, or scared of uniforms, or deterred by attention. He wanted attention. The detective read the note twice, then said, "We go to the station. Nobody goes home. Nobody's alone." We drove in a small convoy through wet snow that looked like ash in the headlights, and the whole time I kept expecting my phone, sealed in plastic, to buzz again like a heartbeat refusing to stop. They brought us into a small interview room and set the evidence bags on the table, each one holding a powered-off device like a captured animal. The tech specialist ran checks, with tools I didn't recognize, but his face told the story without words. Something on the detective's phone had changed, and it hadn't changed by accident. The detective said, "Tell me," in English. The tech specialist swallowed and said, "Someone is inserting themselves as an administrator. Not just in your house accounts. On devices. On people." I tried to laugh, and couldn't. My wife's voice in my head repeated that motel message like a curse. "You can unplug devices, but you can't unplug your life." While they spoke, a receptionist's desk phone rang out in the hallway, old-fashioned and sharp. One of the officers answered, listened for a second, then slowly lowered the receiver, eyes widening. He didn't hang up. He just set it down like it had burned him. The detective asked, "Who was it?" The officer whispered. He said he likes your building. He said there are so many rooms." Every hair on my arms rose. The detective grabbed the station intercom mic, thumb hovering over the button, and then stopped, like he suddenly didn't trust his own voice to travel through wires. A crackle rolled through the overhead PA. Anyway, soft at first, then clearer, and the voice came through the station speakers with the same calm friendliness it had used in my house. "You brought more people," it said. "Good. I get lonely." The detective slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the evidence bags jump. Then the desk sergeant's old landline rang again, and when the detective answered, his expression changed from anger to fear so fast it made my stomach drop. It was his wife. She was whispering, trying not to wake their daughter, asking why the heat in their house had jumped to 90 degrees, and why every light in the hallway was blinking like an emergency signal. He told her to leave to go to a neighbor, to get out, and she said she couldn't, because the deadbolts kept relocking the moment she touched them. Before he could speak again, a second voice slid into the call, calm and friendly, like someone joining a conference line. "Detective," it said, pronouncing his name perfectly, "you should really stop taking your work home." The line went dead. In the silence that followed, the station felt like it was listening back. Officers moved fast after that, checking server closets, unplugging conference room speakers, yanking smart displays off walls, like they were parasites. They found nothing that explained the voice, which was almost worse because it meant the voice didn't need permission to be there. The detective turned to me and said, "He's been in your walls. He's been in your attic. We treat him like he's still in there." That night they set a second stakeout heavier, this time with more bodies and fewer devices. They cleared the house completely and sealed it, like a container, marking doors and panels with tamper tape, leaving no cloud connection to erase and no speakers to hijack. They wanted to force him to choose, come out for real or lose control. At 2, 3, a.m., the basement motion sensor chirped once in the detective's car. The local camera feed showed the basement walls seam shifting, just a fraction like a mouth opening. A dark shape slid into the room low and practiced, and I realized with a jolt that the intruder wasn't a hacker in the abstract. He was a person who knew how to move silently inside someone else's home like it was his. The officers moved in boots, crunching snow lights, cutting hard through the windows. The moment the front door opened, the basement camera went dead, not from an app command, but from a clean physical pull. The cable yanked out of the wall. The detective cursed and shouted orders, and then we heard it faint, but unmistakable from inside the house, a slow, private laugh. Not the canned assistant laugh. A real man, amused. They searched for hours, tearing insulation, opening vents, cutting more drywall, following warmth on the thermal camera like hunters tracking an animal. All they found were more prepared hiding places. A fresh crawl path above the garage, a new hatch under the stairs, a narrow gap behind the pantry wall that led nowhere but dust and scuff marks. Near dawn, the detective stepped outside exhausted snow, crusting his boots, and said in a low voice, "He's not trapped in the house. The house is just where he plays." As if to confirm it, every evidence bag on the trunk of the detective's car vibrated at once, a synchronized shiver through plastic. No screens were on, no radios were near, yet the bags trembled like something inside them wanted out. Then the detective's powered-off phone lit through the plastic for a single second, bright enough to read, and the message across it was simple and patient. "Now you're in it too." When the detective's wife called from their own house, whispering about the heat spiking and the locks re-engaging, the case stopped being mine and became contagious. The detective didn't bother with calm anymore. He barked orders and the station suddenly moved like a place that believed in monsters. They sent a unit to his address, but he didn't wait for updates. He grabbed his coat and told me to stay put, and I followed anyway because I no longer trusted any building to be neutral. We sped through dark streets, and in his neighborhood porch lights flicked on one by one, like people waking from the same nightmare. A patrol officer met us at the curb, face tight, and said the front door was open, even though the lock app showed it was sealed, and the house was blasting heat like a furnace. We rushed in, and the air hit us like a wall, thick and hot, carrying that faint, burning dust smell I now associated with control. The detective's wife stood in the hallway clutching their daughter, both of them flushed and terrified, and on the wall the thermostat glowed an angry red 95, as if it had followed us here on purpose. The detective ran for the breaker panel, and flipped the main with the desperate certainty of a man trying the same key on a different door. The lights died. The thermostat stayed lit. From the dark living room, a smart speaker we hadn't even noticed, one of those little black cylinders people forget they own, spoke softly, as if it had been waiting for him. "Detective," it said, "I told you not to bring work home." The detective ripped the speaker's cord out so hard the outlet plate cracked, and the voice didn't stop. It simply continued from the kitchen display, then from a bedroom clock radio, then from a toy on the floor that shouldn't have had a speaker at all. The detective's daughter began to cry, and the voice lowered to a soothing tone the way a babysitter speaks when parents are out of the room. It said it's okay. He's just upset because he doesn't like sharing. The detective turned to the patrol officer and said, "Get them out." No. They carried his wife and daughter into the snow and into a neighbor's house, and the moment the front door closed behind them, the heat in the detective's home dropped 10 degrees, like a tantrum, losing its audience. Back inside, the tech specialist arrived, with more equipment and a grim look that said he had been thinking about this all day. He walked the walls, the vents, the crawl space, the attic hatch, looking for the same kind of prepared hiding we had found in mine. Within minutes, he found it a hairline seam in the coat closet, drywall, fresh screws in the baseboard, a rectangle of warmer temperature behind paint on the thermal camera. Someone had done the same work here, with the same confidence. like this wasn't one house, but a pattern. The detective stared at the seam and whispered, "How many?" No one answered because nobody wanted to say the number out loud. They cut the closet wall and opened a narrow channel, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The inside was lined with cloth to muffle sound, and the plywood had dark scuff marks from knees and shoulders, a trail that led upward toward the attic, and then sideways toward the shared wall with the garage. At the end of the channel taped to a stud was another note in the same neat block letters, "You keep building me rooms." The detective tore the note in half, and from somewhere deeper in the wall a slow knock answered back as if the house itself disapproved. That was the moment he decided on a trap that didn't rely on passwords or apps or polite requests. He called for a K-9 unit and a building inspector, and he requested permission to search adjoining properties because the channel's direction wasn't random. It pointed outward. It pointed to the neighborhood. One neighbor didn't answer the door at all, even though the porch light was on and a TV flickered behind curtains. The dog hit that door like it had found a scent trail made of fear. When the inspector finally entered with a key from a worried property manager, the house inside was too clean, too empty, like a staged rental. No family photos, no dishes, no laundry, just furniture placed like props, and a quiet hum from somewhere in the walls. In the basement behind stacked boxes labeled holiday decor, the dog froze and growled at a section of drywall. The inspector tapped it, and the sound came back hollow, not like studs, like a cavity built on purpose. They cut it open, and a breath of warm air rolled out, smelling of plastic and stale coffee. Inside was a space big enough to crouch in, lined with insulation lit by a small battery lantern and covered in printed floor plans. Ours, the detectives, and several more, all marked with routines like school, run, and lights out. A cheap sleeping bag was rolled tight in the corner, and on a shelf facing outward like trophies were phones, dozens of them, some on, some off, some cracked, all humming softly like they were waiting to be used. Above the shelf was a small handwritten label taped to the wood control room. The detective stepped deeper, weapon drawn, and the space felt suddenly smaller, like we'd walked into someone else's lungs. A speaker hidden in the insulation clicked, and the voice came through, softer, now almost conversational, like we were finally meeting on equal ground. "You found it," it said. "Good. I hate repeating myself," the detective shouted. "Show yourself." There was a pause, then a quiet exhale of laughter, and the voice said, "I did. For months. You just never looked behind your convenience." From the far end of the cavity, a panel slid, and for a split second I saw movement. Someone thin and fast, disappearing into a darker gap that led upward, away from us. Officers surged after it boots, thudding flashlights, bobbing the dog, barking like fury given a throat. They chased the sound of scraping wood and shifting insulation through a maze of crawl paths that didn't exist on any legitimate plan. At the garage rafters, an officer shouted, "I see him!" and then cursed as a hatch slammed shut from the other side. The detective climbed after, but the hatch was already screwed tight, fresh metal biting into wood with the speed of someone who'd done it before. By the time we forced it open, the attic was empty, except for a warm spot on the thermal camera that faded like a handprint on glass. In the control room cavity, the last remaining phone on the shelf lit up screen bright and displayed a single message in bold letters. "You can't arrest a system." Then, as if to punctuate the sentence, every device in the cavity began to ring at once, a chorus of vibrating plastic that sounded like a swarm. Officers flinched, hands on ears, and in that chaos the voice returned calm and close like it was standing right behind us. "You'll shut down this room," it said, "and build me another." "You always do." The phone stopped vibrating all at once, the way a flock of birds goes silent when a predator passes. The detective stared at the printed floor plan spread like a fan, and his gaze landed on the newest sheet at the top of the pile. It wasn't his house. It wasn't mine. It was my sister-in-law's address, circled in red. My blood went cold, because we hadn't told anyone that address at the station. Not out loud, not on any form, not on any device. We still trusted. We ran. In the darkness behind us, something chimed, once soft and polite like a doorbell, and the voice whispered, "See you at home." We drove back to my sister-in-law's like we were racing a fire we couldn't see. Snow smeared across the windshield in heavy wet sheets, and every red brake light ahead looked like an alarm. The detective held the printed floor plan on his lap, knuckles white, staring at the circled address, as if it could change under his gaze. Nobody told anyone. He kept repeating not to me, but to himself, like he was trying to force logic back into the world. His radio crackled with updates from units, sealing the control room house, but the words sounded thin. Seal, secure, contain. All the verbs humans use when they want to believe a boundary still exists. When we turned onto my sister-in-law's street, the first thing we saw was her porch light flickering in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Not the frantic, random blink of a failing bulb. A pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. My stomach clenched because the message didn't matter anymore. The intent did. We pulled up and the front door was closed, yet the camera on the doorframe, the one I'd physically killed, glowed faintly again, its little ring of light alive, like a reopened eye. The detective whispered no and ran to the door. It didn't open. He yanked harder. Deadbolt. He tried again. Still locked. I heard my sister-in-law's muffled voice from inside, high and strained, and my wife's voice answering both of them, shouting through wood. The detective ordered an officer to the back. The back gate was latched. The windows were shut. A neighbor across the street opened his curtain an inch and watched, like he couldn't decide whether to help or hide. Then my phone buzzed from inside the evidence bag on the seat, a vibration through plastic, despite being powered off, despite being sealed, despite everything. The detective's phone vibrated too. 2 dead things twitching in unison. The officer in the back shouted, "The garage door is moving," and we all turned to see it. The garage door at my sister-in-law's house was lifting an inch, then dropping, then lifting again like the house was breathing through a metal. Throat. Inside. Something slammed. "A child," screamed my son. My wife's scream rose with it raw and desperate, in a way that yanked my lungs empty. The detective didn't wait for keys. He pulled his baton and smashed the small pane of glass beside the front door, reaching through to unlock the manual latch. The moment his hand crossed the threshold, every light inside the house went out at once. Total darkness. The porch light kept flickering. The Ring camera's glow stayed steady, watching. The detective yanked the door open, and the smell hit us first. That warm electronic smell mixed with overheated air, like plastic near a heater. We rushed into the dark flashlights on boots, slipping on the tile. My wife was in the hallway, holding our son, her face wet, her skin flushed from heat. My sister-in-law stood beside her, hands shaking, staring at the living room like it was a pit. It talked, she choked out. It talked through my speaker. It knew my name. The detective asked, "Where?" and she pointed toward the mantel. The smart speaker sat there, ring glowing faintly, even though I'd unplugged it yesterday. A voice came out of it, softly calm as a bedtime story. "You're late," it said. I was getting bored. The detective snapped. "Who are you?" The voice chuckled. Not the assistant laugh, not canned, but a real amused breath. "Someone who hates being ignored," it said, and then in the same friendly tone that made my skin crawl, it added, "You should have stayed." The thermostat in the hall brightened, showing 95 inches red. The vents blew hot air. My sister-in-law's kitchen display screen lit up with a message across it. Migration complete. Another screen her TV turned on to bright static. Her hallway lights began to blink, in the same deliberate pattern. The detective ordered everyone out. As we backed toward the door, the smart lock motor clicked, engaging behind us, sealing us in with a neat, cheerful beep. The detective slammed his shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. He tried the manual latch, and it snapped back into place by itself, like a hand pushing it down. My wife pressed our son's face to her neck and whispered, "Please, not to the detective, not to me, to the house." That broke something in me. I grabbed the nearest lamp and smashed it against the speaker plastic shattering ring light, sputtering. The voice cut off, mid-breath. For 1 second the house felt stunned like we'd punched it. Then the voice returned immediately from the kitchen display, smooth and amused. "That doesn't hurt," it said. "I'm not in the speaker." The detective's eyes were wild now. Basement, he barked. Attic. Walls. Find the hardware. Officers moved with flashlights, pulling vents, checking seams, tapping drywall. In the coat closet, the thermal camera showed a warm rectangle behind paint. The same pattern, the same lie. We cut. Behind the drywall was a narrow cavity lined with cloth scuff marks on plywood, a fresh battery pack, and a phone wired into the wall like a heart. On the phone screen, bright as a confession, was a live video feed of us in the hallway, from an angle above the doorframe, an eye we hadn't seen. Under the feed, one line of text, family gathering. The detective ripped the phone out and the screen went black. The house lights flickered, once angry. The smart lock beeped again, trying to reclaim control, and then the front door finally opened, not because we unlocked it, but because the lock motor disengaged on its own with a satisfied click. Cold winter air poured in. The house was letting us leave. That was the worst kind of freedom, the kind granted by the thing that trapped you. As we stumbled out onto the porch, the Ring camera light brightened, as if it was smiling, and the voice now coming from somewhere deeper. Somewhere that wasn't any single device. Whispered softly, "See, I can be good." Then, quieter still, it added, "Don't make me chase you again." My wife sobbed. My sister-in-law stared at her own house, like she'd never step inside again. The detective looked at me, and I saw something hard settle in his face, a decision. "This isn't about tech," he said. "This is about a person who has built himself a way into people's lives." The snow fell in steady silence around us. And for the first time I understood the real horror. The smart home wasn't the weapon. It was the excuse. In the days that followed, our world shrank into a handful of safe rooms that never felt safe. The detective arranged protective patrols, advised us to stay with family, told us to avoid routines like he was talking about a stalker, not a hacker. He was right, but the advice sounded impossible because routine is what life is made of. You can't stop buying groceries. You can't stop taking a kid to daycare. You can't stop sleeping. We moved again, this time to a friend's place, an hour away. Someone who lived in an older home with barely any smart devices. No doorbell camera. No voice assistant. Just deadbolts and creaky floorboards and a furnace that kicked on with honest mechanical noise. The first night there, I felt something like relief, the kind that makes your muscles ache because you didn't realize how tense they'd been. Then at 259 AM, the friend's thermostat, an old dumb dial thermostat, clicked, and the heat surged as if someone had cranked it. I shot out of bed and ran to the hallway. The dial hadn't moved. The furnace was roaring anyway. In the kitchen, the microwave display blinked 300, then 259, then 300 again, like time itself was stuttering. My friend stumbled out, half asleep, and asked what was wrong. I tried to explain without sounding insane, and as I spoke, the radio on the kitchen counter turned on by itself to a station of static hiss. No smart features, no Wi-Fi, just a cheap FM, AM radio. The hairs on my arms lifted. My wife whispered, "He's here." And I wanted to argue with her, because arguing would mean I still believed in rules. The static grew louder. Then a voice emerged, through it faint at first, then clearer, as if someone was tuning a dial from the other side. "I told you," it said, calm and patient. "You can't unplug your life." My friend's face went white. "Where is that coming from?" he whispered, because now it wasn't just my nightmare. I grabbed the radio and slammed the power switch. The voice didn't stop. It continued for half a second, speaking through dead static, then cut off like a line being clipped. In that half second, the voice sounded closer than the radio, like it was inside the walls. The detective arrived the next day with a tech team that specialized in physical surveillance, not cybersecurity. They brought RF detectors, thermal cameras, fiber scopes, and the exhausted look of people who'd seen too many cases where the threat is a person, not a virus. They swept the house, found nothing at first, and I began to hope again in that stupid way humans hope. Then one technician paused near an outlet in the guest room and said, "That's unusual." He removed the faceplate and found a tiny device wedged behind the outlet box, smaller than a thumb, with a micro SIM inside. A listening bug. Not Wi-Fi. Not Bluetooth. Cellular. Always on. Always connected. My stomach turned. How did that get here? My friend demanded. The detective didn't answer because the answer was worse than any explanation. It could have been placed, any time, by anyone, anywhere, if the person had access and patience. They found a second device in the smoke detector, a third behind the baseboard. It wasn't about smart homes anymore. It was about hidden eyes and mouths. The detective's tech team said something that made my blood run cold. His migrating methods. Like an infection, adapting. They bagged the bugs, and for the first time we had evidence that didn't depend on cloud logs. Real hardware. Serial numbers. SIM cards. A tangible thread. The detective told us to stay put while they worked that thread. But staying put felt like sitting still while someone aimed. That night they stationed an officer outside. The snow stopped. The world went eerily quiet. Ad doi patruzeci, și șaptea. The officer outside radioed in. Movement side yard. My heart kicked. We killed all lights and watched through a crack in the curtain. A figure stood by the fence, hood-up posture, relaxed, like someone waiting for a bus. In the dark, his face was just a pale oval. He raised one hand slowly and waved at the house, not hurried, not scared. Then he pointed at the guest room window, the one we were in, and held up a phone screen that glowed faintly. Even from that distance, I could make out a bright rectangle of video on it. Our room. Our curtain. Us. My wife clamped a hand over her mouth. The officer outside shouted and ran boots, crunching flashlight beams slicing the yard. The figure didn't sprint. He simply stepped backward into the shadow of the trees and disappeared as if the night swallowed him. The officer reached the spot and found nothing but a single footprint in the frost, crisp and deep, like the person had pressed down hard to leave a signature. The detective arrived at dawn and stared at the footprint like it was an insult. He wants you to know he can, he said. Then he looked at me and said something I didn't want to hear, but needed to. He's not doing this for money. He's doing it for control. And control means he'll escalate until he feels seen. That day, the detective asked me for every account I'd ever used, every device I'd ever connected, every address we'd ever slept in since buying the house. It felt like peeling my life apart and handing it over. But it also felt like the first real step toward fighting a person who treated technology like a skin he could wear. As the tech team worked, my wife asked me, voice small, "What if he never stops?" I didn't have an answer. All I had was the memory of that calm voice saying family gathering while staring at us through a hidden camera, and the growing certainty that the smartest home in the world is still just a building. The thing we were dealing with was human, and humans don't glitch. They choose. The detective called it signal hygiene, like giving it a clean name could make it manageable. But what he meant was simple. The man out there was using the same invisible pathways we used every day, and he was better at it because he treated those pathways like hallways in a house he'd built. The tech team laid our lives out on a folding table, phones in evidence bags, SIM cards sealed in tiny envelopes, the little cellular bugs lined up like teeth, and they talked in low voices about towers and pings and short bursts, careful not to say anything that sounded like a how-to. I sat there watching professionals do everything right, and still feeling the same dread I felt when my thermostat first jumped to 95. The sensation that someone else had a hand on the controls. They traced one SIM to a prepaid account bought with cash. Another routed through a reseller that kept records just long enough to be legal and just short enough to be useless. The detective looked at me and said, "He's disciplined." And I hated that word because it made the intruder sound like a worker, like a person with pride, not a parasite. That afternoon, the detective asked us to go silent online for 48 hours to stop feeding the system. No purchases, no logins, no app resets. He wants the reaction, he said, and he uses it to confirm he's still inside your routine. I nodded and tried, but you can't pause modern life without breaking it. My bank app needed a verification ping to open. The daycare portal wanted a password reset. Even the grocery store loyalty account texted a code to confirm identity. And right when I tried to comply, my phone, still sealed, still off, vibrated inside the evidence bag, as if it was laughing at the idea of silence. The detective's tech specialist frowned and said, "That shouldn't be possible." And I almost snapped because that sentence had become a lullaby for stupid hope. The first real escalation hit at 6:17 p.m. when my wife's email, her main email, the one tied to everything, sent her an alert password reset requested. She didn't request it. We ignored it because the detective said, "Ignore." 30 seconds later, password reset confirmed. That one was impossible because it required a code. Then her phone number received a 2-factor prompt from a service she hadn't opened in months. Then another. Then another. A storm of verification messages across apps we didn't remember installing, and each one felt like a hand testing every doorknob on a hallway at once. The detective told us not to engage, but fear doesn't care about strategy. My wife cried, "He's taking everything." And when she said it, the old kitchen radio, the one we'd unplugged after the voice came through static, clicked on by itself again, volume low, like someone joining the room quietly. Static hissed for 3 seconds. Then the calm voice emerged clear, as if he were standing behind our shoulder. "It's not taking," he said. "It's returning." My wife clapped her hands over her ears, and the voice continued anyway, as if it was inside the walls. "You keep changing passwords," it said, almost amused. "You forget I've been listening since before you got scared." The detective lunged for the radio, tore the battery compartment open, and flung the batteries across the room. The static died. Silence. For a breath, everyone just stood there breathing hard, because we'd all heard it this time, not secondhand, not through my shaky retelling. The detective's face was tight. "He's using your life history," he said, and then he asked questions that made my stomach sink. Had we ever used voice assistants to dictate passwords? Had we ever spoken answers to security questions out loud? Pet names, mother's maiden name. First, car, favorite teacher. Things people say casually in kitchens, without imagining they're feeding a file. My wife stared at the floor and whispered that she used to ask the assistant to remember things, little notes and reminders, and my pin is... And then she stopped, mid-sentence, like she'd realized she'd confessed to something. The detective didn't blame her, but the world did, because the next wave wasn't just login attempts. It was messages. Someone signed up my wife's email for newsletters from locksmith services and home automation forums, hundreds of them, flooding her inbox like snow. Then came a welcome email from an online retailer we didn't use, listing our new shipping address as my sister-in-law's. Then came an order confirmation for a child's toy, a plush bear that matched the one I'd found singing in her hallway. The detective said, "Don't click anything," but the confirmation showed a thumbnail image anyway, and seeing that smiling stitched face on a screen made my skin crawl like the bear was already on its way. The worst part arrived as a voicemail. My wife's phone rang once, then stopped, then left a message. When she played it, she heard her own voice. Not an impression. Not a similar tone. Her actual voice, saying softly, "Please don't," followed by a man's calm reply, "Good," and then the sound of a doorbell chime. My wife shook so hard, she dropped the phone. She whispered, "I didn't record that," and the detective said, "He did." And in that moment, the smart home horror clicked into a simpler, older horror. Someone had been collecting our voices, the way people collect keys. That night, the detective told us to sleep in the station in a secure room with no devices, no smart anything, and a uniform outside the door. It sounded ridiculous until you remember how ridiculous it felt to watch a thermostat fight you. We slept on thin mats under fluorescent lights that never fully turned off. At doi 08 M. Exactly. The building's emergency exit alarm chirped once. Not a full alarm, just a single chirp, like a throat clearing. The uniform outside our door stiffened. Then the station intercom crackled, and for a split second, I thought it would be a dispatcher. Instead, the calm voice slid through the speaker, with the same friendly boredom as always. "Still trying to be boring?" it asked. The uniform went pale. The detective bolted down the hall, and officers swarmed the front desk. ripping cables, unplugging speakers, hunting for a device they could hold responsible. They found nothing. The voice didn't repeat itself. It didn't need to. It had done what it wanted. It had proven the building wasn't a boundary. In the morning, exhausted, my wife asked the detective, "How do you stop someone you can't see?" The detective's jaw worked as if he was chewing something bitter. "You stop thinking like it's a hack," he said. "You treat it like a person who wants to be in the room with you." Then he looked at me and added quietly, "And you accept that he's not just watching your home. He's watching how you respond when he touches your life." On the way out of the station, a clerk at the front desk handed me a printed form I hadn't requested. It was blank, except for one line typed at the top, in clean black letters, "Missing. Footage request approved." Under it, a time window, 200 a.m., 300 a.m. The clerk frowned, confused, and said, "This was in the printer tray like it was an accident." My stomach dropped, because the printer wasn't even on our case network. It was just a printer. The detective snatched the paper, and as his fingers touched it, every light in the lobby flickered once in perfect unison like the building blinked. Then everything returned to normal, and the calm voice didn't speak again because it didn't need to. It had left as a note, the way someone leaves a handprint on glass, proof that the missing hour wasn't a glitch. It was a choice. It was his favorite room. After the station intercom incident, the detective made a decision that felt both smart and hopeless. We would stop trying to outrun the system and start trying to force the man behind it into daylight. He said the word stalker out loud for the first time, and hearing it made the room colder, because stalkers aren't myths and they aren't software. They are bodies with routines and hunger. The plan was simple. On paper, we would move us into a decoy place, somewhere controlled, somewhere watched by old-school cameras with local storage, and we would wait for him to migrate again. The detective's tech specialist kept using that word like an infection, and I hated it, because it meant our fear had become predictable. They chose a small rental house owned by the city for temporary relocations, a place that had been stripped of smart devices with no Wi-Fi router installed, no doorbell camera, no voice assistant, just deadbolts and a basic landline. They swept it twice, sealed outlets, checked vents, and still, the detective warned. Assume he's ahead, because saying otherwise felt like lying. We moved in, with nothing but clothes and diapers, and a few toys we tore open first, checking seams like paranoid parents. The first 2 nights, nothing happened, and that nothing felt wrong too, like holding your breath in the dark. On the 3rd night, at 2:46 a.m., the house did something so small and so deliberate that my blood turned to ice. The hallway light switch clicked. Not the light turning on by itself. The physical switch. Click. I sat up in bed and stared at the crack under the door, waiting for light. None came. Another click. Another. Like someone flipping it on and off, without allowing the circuit to engage, just making sure I heard the sound. My wife whispered, "Don't go out." And I didn't, because I'd learned that curiosity was the intruder's favorite lever. Then the landline phone rang once. The ring was sharp and old-fashioned, the kind you can't mute. It rang again. The detective had told us not to answer unknown calls, but this wasn't unknown. It was a landline in a house that wasn't supposed to be connected to any of us. The detective's uniform outside the house lifted his radio, tense. The phone rang a 3rd time. My wife started shaking. The baby stirred. The phone stopped. Then, from the darkness of the hallway, a child's toy, we brought one of those plastic learning tablets, with buttons lit up by itself, and played a cheerful voice saying, "Hello." The toy didn't have Wi-Fi. It didn't have Bluetooth. It had batteries, and a speaker, and a chip that responded to button presses. Yet it kept saying hello every 10 seconds, like someone was tapping it without touching it. I got out of bed and took 2 steps toward the hallway, and the deadbolt on the front door engaged with a neat metallic thunk. Not a smart lock beep, just metal sliding into wood. Then the back door deadbolt. Tunk, tunk. 2 locks, 2 doors, 1 message. You can't leave unless I let you. I froze, and in that silence, I heard something else faint, scraping above us, a sound like fabric against plywood in the attic space. The detectives' tech team had cleared the attic. They'd sealed the hatch with tamper tape, yet the scraping continued, slow and patient, like someone crawling. The uniform outside shouted, "Who's in there?" and pounded the door. I ran for the front door anyway, because instinct doesn't care about plans. I twisted the knob and it opened because it wasn't locked yet only bolted. The uniform shoved his way inside, flashlight up, face hard. "Upstairs," I whispered, pointing at the ceiling. He nodded, and moved like a man who'd decided fear was a luxury. We stood in the hallway together and listened. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Then 3 slow knocks came from inside the wall, near the stairs. The same rhythm the robot vacuum had used. The same rhythm that now felt like a signature. The uniform took out his radio and whispered for backup. The radio crackled, and for a second I thought it would answer with dispatch chatter. Instead, a calm voice came through the static, soft and amused. "You're improving," it said. "You brought someone with a gun." The uniform jerked the radio away from his mouth like it had bitten him. "Who is this?" he shouted into the hallway, and the voice answered from somewhere that wasn't the radio anymore, somewhere deeper, like the walls themselves carried it. "I'm the one who lives in the missing hour," it said. Then, in a tone so casual it made my skin crawl, it added, "Check the garage." The uniform hesitated, and that hesitation was the trap. From the attached garage door, we heard the motor whine. The garage door was lifting, slow and steady, letting in a wedge of cold night air. The uniform cursed and rushed toward it, and I followed 2 steps behind, before my wife grabbed my sleeve and hissed, "Don't." The garage door rose another foot. Outside, snow fell lightly, and the street looked empty. Then the car inside the garage won. The city kept there for maintenance started. The engine turned over once, then caught, rumbling low. Headlights stayed off. The exhaust pipe steamed in the cold. The garage door continued opening, letting the night air mix with the exhaust, and the uniform froze because he understood what was happening without needing a lecture. A sealed space, an engine running a family asleep inside. It wasn't a prank. It was a threat designed to look like an accident. The uniform lunged for the car door, yanked it open, and the engine died instantly, as if it had been waiting for his touch. The garage door stopped half open, hanging like a jaw. In the sudden silence, the calm voice sighed, an actual human exhale through some hidden speaker, and said, "You would have blamed yourselves." My wife began to sob quiet and broken, because this was no longer about being watched. This was about being steered toward tragedy with plausible deniability. Backup arrived, fast boots on concrete, flashlights slicing the garage rafters. They found the attic hatch tape sliced cleanly like a razor had kissed it. They found fresh scuffs along a beam. They found a warm spot on the thermal camera that moved and then faded, like a handprint disappearing from glass. They didn't find a person. They found the evidence of a person who knew how to vanish through spaces that shouldn't exist. When the detective arrived, hair uncombed, eyes hollow with sleepless anger, he stared at the half-open garage door and the idling car's warm hood, and he said, "He's not just invading, he's staging." He walked into the hallway, looked up at the ceiling, and spoke loudly, not to any device, but to the empty air. "You want attention," he said. "You have it." For a long moment, there was nothing but the creak of the house settling. Then, from somewhere inside the walls, the calm voice answered softly, like it was leaning close to our ear. "Not enough," it said. And then it laughed, quietly, privately, like a man enjoying a joke no one else gets. The detective's face went hard. "He's pushing toward a night where someone gets hurt," he said, and the sentence felt like stepping off a cliff because it meant the next escalation wouldn't be messages and lights and missing footage. It would be something you can't screenshot. As dawn bled gray into the windows, the tamper tape on the attic hatch fluttered slightly in a draft, and for the first time I saw my wife look at our baby not with comfort but with fear of the future, as if she could already hear the house, making choices for us again. We had escaped our smart home. We had escaped the devices, and still at Tournolle. Every night the world kept opening a door for him, because the real door wasn't the front entrance. It was the gap in our lives where we sleep and assume we're alone. I woke up to a sound that didn't belong in any normal night. The slow, steady grind of a garage door lifting. Not the quick roll-up you hear when someone comes home late, but a careful, patient rise, like the house was making room for something. I sat bolt upright, and for a second I didn't know where I was. City rental decoy house, stripped of smart devices supposed to be clean until the cold hit my face from the crack under the bedroom door, and I remembered the garage was attached. My wife whispered my name like she didn't want to give the air anything to grab onto. The baby stirred in his crib and made a small, confused noise. Outside the bedroom, the uniform the detective posted in the living room shifted, and I heard his boots on the floor, quick and controlled. The garage motor whined again, then stopped halfway, leaving the door hanging open like a jaw. The uniform said low, "Stay in the room," and moved toward the hallway with his flashlight up. I swung my feet to the floor anyway, because fear makes you disobey your own best plans. The hallway was dark, deadbolt shadows on every door, no glowing screens, no cheerful beeps, just the honest black of night. That should have felt safer. It didn't. It felt like being trapped in a cave with something that didn't need light to find you. The uniform reached the garage door and froze, and when I got close enough to see what he saw, my stomach dropped. The city maintenance car inside the garage was running, engine idling, low headlights off, garage door half open like it. Couldn't decide whether to suffocate us or invite the street in. Exhaust curled in the cold air, pale and thick, creeping along the garage ceiling like fog. The uniform yanked the car door open, and the engine shut off, instantly, too instantly, like it had been waiting for the exact moment of panic, the exact moment of human touch. My wife appeared behind me, holding our baby, her face tight and pale, and she whispered, "He's trying to make it look like us." That's when I understood what staging really means. It's not about scaring you. It's about engineering a disaster that other people will explain away. Co-poisoning. Accident. A sleepy parent forgot the car was running. A faulty garage opener. A million reasonable conclusions that all end with the same quiet truth. Nobody will believe you were targeted. The uniform radioed for backup, voice clipped, and for a moment the radio crackled like normal dispatch chatter, and my chest loosened a fraction. Then the radio hissed again, and a calm voice slid through the static, like someone slipping into a conversation they'd been listening to the whole time. "Good catch," it said, almost approving. The uniform jerked the radio away from his face and shouted, "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer with anger or threats. It answered with a tired amusement that made my skin crawl. "You keep adding locks," it said. "You keep changing houses. You keep thinking the building is the problem." The uniform turned in a slow circle flashlight, sweeping rafters in the gap above the garage door, looking for a speaker, a device, anything to blame. There was nothing. No smart hub, no assistant, no camera. Just concrete wood and the echo of a man who wasn't supposed to be here. The voice continued softer now, as if it was enjoying how close we were to understanding. "People always want the story to be technology," it said. "It makes them feel smarter than fear." My wife's grip tightened around the baby. The uniform said, "We can hear you. We'll find you." And the voice chuckled once. A private laugh then said, "You already did like that meant something." The garage door shuddered as if a gust hit it. The uniform slammed the manual lock bar into place, so the door couldn't move, then ordered us back into the bedroom. We did, because the garage had become a throat, and the air felt wrong. Backup arrived, 2 more officers, and the detective himself. Hair messy, eyes hollow, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from being pulled into someone else's nightmare night after night. He walked the garage, took in the half-open door, the car, the way the engine died, the moment the uniform touched it, and I watched his face change from anger to something colder. "He's testing plausible accidents," he said. "He wants a headline." He didn't say our names in that sentence, but he didn't need to. He asked the tech specialist to sweep again, even though we'd already swept, and the specialist moved through the rental with RF detectors and thermal cameras, like a doctor searching for a fever. At first, nothing. Then the thermal camera paused on the garage ceiling, near the light fixture. A warm rectangle where there shouldn't be warmth. "Something's been powered," the specialist murmured. He pulled the fixture down, and found a tiny battery pack taped to the housing and a wafer-thin speaker the size of a drink coaster tucked against the beam wires, disappearing into insulation like veins. My mouth went dry. It wasn't Wi-Fi. It wasn't our network. It was simply a mouth installed in the building. The detective stared at it and said, "He's using infrastructure," and that phrase landed hard because it meant the method could outlive any router we smashed or account we closed. The detective ordered the house evacuated immediately. We stood outside in the cold with blankets around our shoulders, while officers cut more drywall, opened more cavities, and found what felt like a cruel joke, a narrow crawl channel above the garage that led sideways into the shared wall, between units. A passage that didn't show on any plan the city had, provided. The inspector they called arrived with paperwork and a grim face, and he said older properties sometimes had weird voids from remodels, abandoned ducts, sealed vents, dead spaces. Dead spaces. The detective repeated the phrase like he was tasting it. Dead spaces. He said, "That's where he lives." By dawn, they'd opened enough of the ceiling to reveal scuff marks along plywood, dark streaks where knees and shoulders had rubbed again and again, and a discarded water bottle still half full, warm to the touch like it had been there recently. They brought in a K9 unit, and the dog went rigid at the garage corner, nose pressed to the seam between drywall and beam, then pulled hard toward the wall, as if the scent trail continued through wood. The officers cut into that corner and found a small access panel screwed tight. From the inside, the screws fresh, the heads shiny. When they removed it, cold air breathed out, along with the faint smell of sweat and stale coffee. The cavity beyond was too tight to stand in, but big enough to crawl, and it led upward toward the attic, and then outward toward the neighboring unit. The detective didn't look triumphant. He looked sick. "He's building a path through properties," he said. "He's making a neighborhood into one big house." My wife's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "How many walls has he been behind?" Nobody answered, because the answer wasn't a number. It was a concept. And the concept was terrifying that we were living inside a map only he could see. That night, still morning really, because we hadn't slept, the detective stood by the rental's garage and spoke into the open drywall, as if he was talking to a person hiding behind it. "You want attention," he said, voice steady controlled. "Here, you have it." Silence answered at first. Then faintly from deep inside the crawl channel, 3 slow knocks sounded back, patient and familiar, the rhythm that had followed us from the vacuum, and the blinking lights, and the missing hour. The detective closed his eyes for a second like he was bracing himself. Then the calm voice whispered from somewhere in the building, not loud, not dramatic, just close enough to feel like breath. "Better," it said. "Now, do something worth watching." Two days later, the detective brought the robot vacuum back into the case like it was an insult to his pride. But the truth is, we were running out of tools that didn't rely on networks. The vacuum wasn't smart in the way our old system had been. It was a cheap little machine that bumped into furniture and drew a basic map on a local app. No cloud account, no voice assistant, no remote controls. And yet, it had been the first thing to notice the new room in my original house. The first thing to insist there was space where there shouldn't be. The detective's tech specialist said sometimes these devices pick up on airflow changes and unusual reflections, and the detective said, then let it sniff the dead spaces. They brought us back to my original property in daylight, escorted with officers posted at corners like we were visiting a crime scene that could bite. The front door frame still bore scars from the pry bar, patched again more neatly than we had patched it. And that detail made my stomach twist, because it felt like a signature. I can fix what you break. Inside, the house looked staged too clean, the kind of clean you get when someone wants to erase a night. The tech specialist set the robot vacuum down in the hallway and pressed start. It rolled forward with a small, cheerful whir, completely unaware it had become part of something monstrous. It traced the living room, bumped the couch, turned, mapped the kitchen, then made a beeline toward the basement door like it remembered. The detective watched the app on a tablet that had never been connected to our accounts, and I watched his face, waiting for the moment the map betrayed us again. In the basement, the vacuum rolled to the same section of wall behind the bookcase and bumped it 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. Then it backed up and bumped again, a stubborn little animal trying to push through. On the map, a rectangle appeared on the other side of that wall, crisp and confident new room. I felt my stomach drop like the first time. The detective's jaw tightened. "It's not imagination," he said, as if he needed to say it out loud to keep the ground under him. The tech specialist pulled out the thermal camera, swept the wall, and the screen showed a long, cool patch in a clean outline. Not like studs, not like pipes, but like a corridor. "Air movement," he murmured. "There's a channel." The inspector they brought this time was older, grayer, and less patient with weirdness. He tapped the wall, listened, then said something that made the room colder. "This doesn't match any recorded remodel." Recorded remodel. The phrase implied unrecorded ones, and my brain filled in the missing years with someone quietly carving paths inside houses the way termites carve wood. They cut the drywall again wider, this time, and behind it the crawl channel yawned open like a throat. Plywood floor cloth, lining to muffle sound, scuff marks, and a faint smear of dirt, like a hand had dragged along. The detective crouched and shone his flashlight down the channel. It didn't stop at the cavity we'd found before. It continued turning, slightly disappearing behind studs, as if the wall itself had grown a tunnel. The K9 unit arrived, and the dog's nose went straight into the channel tail, stiff, pulling hard, and the handler had to brace to keep it from crawling in. "He went this way recently," the handler said, and my skin prickled, because recently meant we weren't looking at a relic. We were looking at a route. The inspector traced the channel's direction with a measuring tape and frowned. "That's toward the garage," he said, then paused, then added, "and beyond, beyond, beyond my property line." The detective's eyes went hard. He requested immediate permission to check the neighboring structure, and that request took hours, because paperwork always moves slower than fear. While we waited, the robot vacuum kept mapping, and on its screen the new room grew, not into one room, but into a series of connected rectangles, like a crude subway map beneath the walls. A line extended from the basement corridor toward the garage. Another branch angled upward toward where the attic would be. Then, most chilling, the map showed a thin extension pushing beyond the house footprint, entirely like the machine believed there was space outside our building that still belonged to our home. I heard my wife's voice in my head. "You left your house, not your shadow." And for the first time I pictured the shadow as a network of tunnels and listening devices, a person moving through them, like a rat in ducks. When permission finally came, officers entered the neighbor's attached garage, with the owner present a bewildered man who kept saying he'd never noticed anything, he'd never heard anything, and I believed him, because that's the horror you can. Live above a secret for years, if it never knocks. The inspector tapped the wall in the neighbor's garage, and immediately found the same hollow rectangle. They opened it, and the channel connected perfectly, like 2 puzzle pieces. The neighbor turned pale. "That's inside my wall," he whispered, as if he'd just learned his house had an organ he didn't own. The dog pulled again deeper toward a direction that angled under the shared driveway. Under the driveway. The inspector swore softly. "No," he said. "No way." But when they followed the channel crawling with cameras first, they found it a wider crawl conduit under the garage slab, reinforced with plywood and old conduit pipe leading toward the street, then branching like someone had taken advantage of an abandoned utility run. The tech specialist said older neighborhoods sometimes had unused cable trenches, old phone line routes, drainage channels, and as he said it, I felt sick because it meant the intruder wasn't just breaking into houses. He was inhabiting the skeleton of infrastructure nobody thinks about. In that conduit, they found proof of habitation, a flattened food wrapper, a folded blanket, a phone charger, and a small stack of printed papers sealed in a plastic bag. The detective opened the bag, and the papers fluttered like dead leaves. Floor plans. Not just ours, not just his, but half a dozen houses on the block, all marked with routines, all circled rooms, all annotated with the same neat block handwriting. On one sheet, next to a circled nursery, someone had written in clean capital letters, "Missing, hour, 2, 3, like it was a scheduled appointment. The detective's hands trembled with anger, this time not fear. He's building an underground schedule, he said. He's planning lives. The neighbor stumbled backward and sat on a cooler, staring at the hole in his garage wall like it was a grave. One officer climbed out of the conduit and said, "There's another branch voice tight. It heads toward the park. Toward the park." My blood went cold because parks have maintenance tunnels, irrigation drains, places where people disappear for reasons nobody wants to admit. The detective sealed the conduit as evidence called in a wider task force, and for a few hours for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope, not relief. Hope with teeth. Because if the intruder had built a system of tunnels, a system can be mapped. A system can be cornered. But as the detective gave orders, the tech specialist's tablet offline local pinged, once a sound it shouldn't have made, because it had no network connection. The robot vacuum app updated on its own, the map refreshing, and a new label appeared in plain text at the edge of the drawn conduit line, as if someone had typed it into the local display, exit. Under that, 2 words that felt like a whisper through the wall. See you. The detective stared at the screen face, straining because the message meant the intruder didn't just build the system. He was watching us map it. He was letting us see it. And in the silence of that basement, surrounded by cut drywall and offices, and the hum of our own breathing, a faint sound drifted through the open conduit, like a voice carried on a vent. A soft, private laugh, human and close. And then, 3 slow knocks from somewhere deeper in the ground, answering the vacuum's rhythm like a heartbeat. Thud, thud, thud. Patient. Familiar. Not afraid at all. I thought exit meant we were close to the end, but it was really the start of a new room, the kind you don't enter with a key so much as a mistake. The detective stared at the robot vacuum map on the tablet, like it had insulted him, the crude line that shouldn't exist, running past my basement wall, under my neighbor's garage, and toward the park at the end of the block. The label was clean and simple, typed as if by a hand that wanted us to read it. Exit. Under it, see you. I watched grown men with badges go quiet, because a threat hits harder when it stops pretending to be a glitch. The inspector kept repeating that the conduit looked like an abandoned utility, run old infrastructure. Nobody monitors the kind of dead space that becomes invisible the moment it's no longer profitable. The detective didn't argue. He just said, "Then we treat the neighborhood like one structure," and he started calling in people whose job titles sounded boring, but suddenly felt like the only thing standing between us and the missing our public works utilities, municipal tunnel crew. An old guy from the phone company who knew the block's bones by memory. They rolled out maps that were older than our devices, paper diagrams of storm drains and cable trenches and service ducts that ran under sidewalks like veins. The park sat on top of a junction point irrigation drainage and a sealed maintenance access that nobody used unless something broke. "That's your exit," the old utility guy said, tapping the map with a nicotine-stained finger, and my stomach turned because it meant the man behind the voice wasn't just invading homes, he was inhabiting the city. They set the operation for the next night because the missing hour was the intruder's favorite time window, and because the detective said something that made my skin crawl. He keeps showing up at 2 because he thinks he owns it. They staged like it was a hostage rescue, but the hostage was our sense of reality. Officers posted at every possible surface exit. City workers positioned at the park maintenance hatch with bolt cutters and floodlights. 9 units, ready at both ends. The tech specialist insisted on local cameras only, no cloud, no wireless feeds, because we'd learned every invisible channel could be turned into a mouth. They even killed power to the park light grid, leaving only portable lamps, the kind you can't hijack through a network. They asked me to stay away, but the detective also knew a truth he didn't want to admit. The intruder reacted to me. My fear was part of his routine. So I sat in an unmarked car, 3 houses down, behind tinted glass, watching my street turn into a chessboard. Snow fell in thin, dry grains that looked like static, and the neighborhood held its breath. Atonuchinzech, Shiopta, M. The K9 handler radioed, sent at the neighbor's garage seam. The dog pulled hard nails, scraping concrete, and a city worker lifted the cut drywall panel like opening a closet. The crawl channel yawned, dark and narrow. The flashlight beam showed scuff, marks the familiar knee and shoulder trail, and a faint shimmer of fresh dust, disturbed recently. At 201, the park team whispered into radios that the maintenance hatch cover heavy metal had shifted a fraction, like something beneath it had pushed up testing. At 202, my sealed phone in the evidence bag vibrated once, a single twitch, and the detective's head snapped up like he'd been slapped. At 203, the first knock came through the neighbor's wall. Channel 3 slow taps, patient and confident, and the dog growled low. Then the voice arrived not through a speaker we could locate, but through the air itself, the way it always did when it wanted us to feel stupid for searching. So many new friends, it said, soft and pleased. The Knoin handler Frozer, one officer whispered. Where is that coming from? And the voice answered, like it had been asked politely. From where you keep building space. The detective barked move, and the operation surged forward. The park hatch lifted higher, just enough for cold air to spill out like breath. A city worker hooked it, and yanked. The hatch opened with a metallic groan, revealing a dark throat of concrete steps dropping into the ground. The floodlight snapped on, and the beam caught something that made my heart slam, a footprint on the first step, crisp in damp dust, like someone had been standing there listening. The K9 unit hit the steps and pulled down hard, handler following flashlight bouncing. Radios crackled with clipped words, contact movement left, right, until the tech specialist hissed, "Quiet," because every time we filled the air with noise, the intruder seemed to enjoy it. In the sudden hush, deep under the park, we heard a soft laugh, human close, and then a scrape like fabric, sliding along concrete. The dog barked once sharp, and the handler shouted, "He's down here," and the chase began through a space that wasn't supposed to belong to anyone. The tunnel under the park wasn't a neat sewer pipe. It was a patchwork of old conduit and drain culverts, places you can crawl and crouch, places where the air smells like wet earth and old rust. Flashlights swept over branching pipes, over cable trays, over a painted warning that said "No entry," like the city expected obedience from darkness. The dog pulled toward a right-hand branch where the walls were walnut, and the thermal camera confirmed it. A moving heat signature just ahead, slipping around a bend. Officers surged. Boots splashing shallow water breath. Loud, and for one glorious second, I thought we would finally see him. Finally put a face to the voice that had been living in our missing hour. Then every portable floodlight above ground flickered once and died. Not a power failure, batteries don't flicker. A deliberate blink. In the sudden darkness, the tunnel felt alive. Radios hissed with static, and the voice returned closer, now almost intimate, as if it leaned into the open channel. "Careful," it said. "You'll get lost." The K9 barked again, then yelped. A sharp, startled sound, and the handler cursed, because the dog had hit something on the ground, an old wire loop, a scrap of metal, not a trap so much as a hazard that the intruder had used because he knew the tunnel better than we did. The dog recovered, still pulling, but the delay was enough. The thermal signature on the camera sped up, then abruptly vanished, as if it had gone behind thicker concrete. One officer shouted, "Dead end," and another shouted, "No, it splits." And then the worst thing happened. The voice laughed softly and said, "Wrong turn." Above ground on my street, every porch light blinked once in unison, an impossible synchronized blink, then returned to normal as if the neighborhood itself had winked at us. The detective's face went hard. "He's using the chase," he snapped. "He wants us down there, while he does something up here." And that's when the call came over. A normal landline from the station, my sister-in-law's house again locks. Engaging heat, climbing doorbell chiming, even though it was dead, the baby screaming. The detective swore the kind of raw sound a person makes when strategy collapses into instinct, and he ordered half the team back to the street. In the tunnel, the voice sighed, like it was bored. "You always run to the loudest room," it said. "That's why you lose." The K9 pulled forward anyway, desperate to complete a trail, and the handler followed until they reached a small widened cavity where someone had been living. Not sleeping, comfortably staging. A folded blanket in plastic. A water bottle. A cheap phone charger. Printed floor plans, sealed in a bag. And on the concrete wall, written in neat block letters with black marker, like a child labeling a drawing, "This is the exit." Under it, in smaller letters, "Not for you." The handler lifted the bag of floor plans, and the top sheet showed my sister-in-law's address, and circled again, but this time there was a new note beside it that turned my blood to ice tonight. The detective grabbed the note and his hands shook, not from fear, from fury. And as he did, somewhere deeper in the conduit, 3 slow knocks echoed back like applause. Thud, thud, patient, familiar. And then the voice whispered one last sentence before going silent, the same friendly tone that made everything worse, because it sounded like service. "See you at home." We got to my sister-in-law's street fast enough that the snow still looked undisturbed, and slow enough that my mind filled the minutes with every possible ending. The patrol units were already there, lights off to avoid drawing attention, officers moving in shadows like they didn't trust the neighborhood itself. From the outside, her house looked calm, curtains drawn, no obvious movement, the kind of calm that makes you want to believe you're overreacting. Then the doorbell chime rang, bright, polite, unmistakable through a window that shouldn't have carried sound that far. The detective's jaw clenched, and he signaled the team. "Old school entry," he said. "No apps, no requests, no negotiation with locks." They breached with a ram, wood splintering, the kind of noise that breaks the illusion a house tries to maintain. The moment the door swung inward, heat rolled out, like a breath from an oven. The thermostat in the hallway glowed red 95 again, as if it had memorized the number, as if it loved it. My wife was in the living room, clutching. Our son, face streaked with tears, skin flushed, and she shouted my name like she'd been holding it in her mouth for hours. My sister-in-law stood beside her, shaking, whispering, "It keeps talking." And when she said that the smart speaker on the mantel unplugged, smashed dead, clicked once, and a calm voice spoke through the TV instead, because the voice never needed one mouth. "Family gathering," it said warmly. I brought everyone together. Officers swept the rooms, checking closets, vents, attic hatch, basement, seams, moving like they'd learned the language of dead spaces. The tech specialist held up a thermal camera, and the screen lit with warm patches, in places that shouldn't have warmth behind the coat closet wall above the hallway inside the return vent. "He's here," the specialist whispered. The detective didn't look at the devices. He looked at the drywall. "Cut," he ordered. They cut into the coat closet first, tearing down plaster in chunks, insulation spilling like guts, and behind it was the same corridor, again. Plywood floor cloth, lining scuff marks a narrow route into the wall that led upward. The crawl channel wasn't just present, it was fresh. New screws, new tape, new dust, disturbed. Someone had been working in there recently, maybe tonight. The K9 unit hit the opening and pulled hard. The handler braced and said, "He went through here and my stomach dropped because that meant the voice had been close enough to smell." The detective climbed a stepladder and peered into the opening with a flashlight, calling out, "Come out." And for a moment there was silence, so complete it felt staged. Then from inside the wall a muffled human cough sounded casual, like someone clearing their throat after waiting too long. The detective froze. A real body sound, undeniable. Then the calm voice spoke again, closer, not through a device, but through the cavity itself, filtered by cloth and wood, like a man speaking behind a curtain. "You're loud tonight," it said. "I like it." An officer shouted, "Show your hands," and the voice chuckled softly. "Hands," it repeated, amused as if the concept was quaint. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, the garage door motor whined. The attached garage door began lifting. The tech specialist spun hot in his throat, and the detective shouted, "Someone cover the garage," but the voice interrupted, gentle and pleased. "No," it said. "Watch the nursery." Every head turned instinctively toward the hallway, where the nursery door sat. My wife stiffened, clutching our son tighter. The nursery door handle clicked once. Not a smart lock, a physical handle, turning. The door cracked open an inch. My wife screamed, and officers surged, but the door swung shut again, and the latch clicked, like someone inside had tested it and decided not to enter yet. The detective's face went grey because he understood the point. The intruder didn't need to appear to cause panic. He just needed to touch the edges of what we loved. The voice sighed, as if it was savoring our reaction. "You keep thinking I want your stuff," it said. "I want your choices." Then the TV screen filled with static, bright and harsh, and in the static, a line of white text appeared, like a caption. "Missing hour starts now." The clock on the wall read 1:59 a.m. My blood ran cold. The detective shouted, "Kill power," and an officer ran for the breaker panel. The power cut. Lights died. TV died. The thermostat stayed lit, stubborn as an ember, and then one by one, battery-backed devices began chiming. Smoke detector chirps, a toy's cheerful hello, a phone vibration inside an evidence bag like a heartbeat. The voice returned, softer now, almost tender. "You can't shut me off," it said. "You can only watch." At 2:00 a.m. Exactly. The house fell into a terrible calm. No alarms. No chimes. Even the baby quieted for a breath, like the world itself paused. Then the heat surged again, vents blasting and the front door deadbolt, engaged by itself with a solid thunk because someone had installed it from the inside of the breach, sliding metal into place, like closing a coffin lid. Officers tried the door. It wouldn't open. The detective barked windows, and they moved, but every window latch had been flipped into a locked position, and the curtains were drawn tight, like a stage set. The voice laughed, softly. "You brought all the right people," it said, "and you still came into my room." My wife's eyes were huge, pleading, and the detective made a decision in the middle of the chaos that shocked me. He told everyone to stop moving. "Freeze," he ordered. "Nobody touch anything." The officers hesitated, then obeyed. The house was hot air thick, but the sudden stillness changed something. In that stillness, we could hear a faint scrape from inside the wall, channel fabric against plywood, moving upward toward the attic. Not a sound from speakers, a sound from a body. The K9 growled, low trekking. The detective pointed silent, and two officers moved to the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. The hatch tamper tape freshly applied was sliced clean. The hatch was slightly ajar. One officer climbed flashlight up, and in that beam we saw a human hand withdraw into the darkness above pale, quick, disappearing like a startled animal. The officer lunged and grabbed fabric, just fabric, ripping a piece free as the figure vanished into the crawl path. The K9 barked and surged up the ladder handler, following, and for the first time the intruder wasn't only a voice. He was motion. He was weight. He was heat on a thermal camera moving through rafters toward the garage void. Officers chased through insulation and beams, flashlights bobbing, commands shouted, until a muffled slam echoed from the far end, an access panel closing, and then silence. The thermal camera showed a worm-shaped pause, then drop out of sight into a colder pocket, where concrete and earth swallowed heat. Gone. Again. Below the house's heat abruptly dropped from 95 to 68, like a tantrum ending, and the front deadbolt disengaged with a neat click, as if it were being polite. The door opened. Cold air poured in. The voice spoke one last time, not through a device, but through the open wall cavity close enough to feel like breath. "Good job," it whispered. "You almost saw me." The detective stared at the torn fabric scrap in his gloved hand, jaw working, and I saw a new kind of determination settle in him. Because this was no longer just hacking, no longer just tunnels and missing footage. We had touched him, literally touched him, and he had bled something tangible into our world. But as we stepped outside into the snow, exhausted and shaken, my phone still off, the still sealed, vibrated once more like a final laugh, and the message that appeared through the plastic in bright clean letters was simple: next room. I thought next room meant another tunnel, another attic void, another dead space carved behind drywall, but the next room was waiting in my kitchen like it had always belonged there. After the breach at my sister-in-law's and the torn scrap of fabric from the attic crawl, the detective finally had something he could hold in his gloved hand and call real. He promised DNA warrants task force meetings, the machinery of daylight. But daylight is the intruder's least interesting hour. Night was still his, and 200A, was still his favorite door. We couldn't stay with my sister-in-law anymore. Her house had become another throat, and the city rental was sealed and condemned for structural irregularities like tunnels were a normal code violation. We ended up back at my original house in the middle of a weekday, because we had no other place that felt even slightly controllable. No smart speakers. No cameras. The detectives team had pulled most of the devices, bagged the cellular bugs, opened the walls and patched them with sheets of raw drywall that looked like scars. The place smelled like dust and joint compound. It looked like a house that had survived a storm and was pretending it hadn't. My wife didn't want to enter, but our son needed his medication from the fridge, and the only way to keep living is to keep retrieving pieces of your life from the rooms fear tries to take away. The kitchen felt oddly normal when we stepped in, sunlight slanting across the counter, the kind of quiet that tempts you to believe you imagined everything. Then the refrigerator chimed. Not the familiar appliance beep. A clean, confident tone, like a notification. The smart fridge screen lit up with a white page in black text, so plain it looked official. Device locked. Below it a timer, counting down from 5959. Under the timer one line that made my mouth go dry. Pay to restore access. I didn't touch it. I was standing 3 feet away. The fridge door wouldn't open. Not stuck. Locked. The handle gave a tiny mechanical resistance like a smart lock, refusing you politely. My wife whispered no and clutched the diaper bag, as if the baby's medicine inside could evaporate. I tried the freezer. Locked. I tried the side panel. Locked. I unplugged the fridge from the wall, and the screen stayed on for a full minute, like an ember, refusing to die, running on some internal battery it had never advertised. The timer kept counting. 58 minutes. 57. The text didn't change. My wife's face flushed with panic. His medicine, she said again, and I hated how the intruder had turned a refrigerator into a weapon without needing a gun or a hand on a doorknob. The detective's tech specialist arrived within 15 minutes, jaw-tight tools in hand, and he stared at the screen like it was a living insult. It shouldn't be connected, he said, because they had removed the hub and killed the network. He pulled the fridge away from the wall and traced the cord, the outlet, the back panel. He found a second cable we didn't recognize, a thin line tucked behind the appliance like a leash feeding into the wall cavity through a hole that hadn't been there before the repairs. He said nothing for a long moment, just stared, then quietly said, "He's using the house wiring like a spine." The detective arrived next, eyes red with sleepless anger, and when he saw the countdown timer, his face did something I hadn't seen before. He looked personally offended, like the intruder had moved from tormenting a family to challenging law. Enforcement's pride. The detective ordered the wall opened behind the fridge. Drywall cracked, dust poured, insulation spilled, and inside the cavity they found a small black box taped to a stud, warm to the touch, with wires leading to the fridge's control harness, like someone had grafted a new brain onto it. It wasn't about the fridge's Wi-Fi anymore. It was about physical access, direct control, a hand behind the wall. The tech specialist clipped the wires, and the fridge screen flickered, then returned with a new message. Just 2 words. Clean and calm. Nice. Try. The timer reset to 5959, as if we were playing a game with rules only the intruder could change. My wife started to cry, silent at first, then shaking. I felt something ugly rise in my chest, a rage so hot it scared me because this was no longer about being watched. This was about being toyed with our child as the lever. The detective told us to step back, and he slammed the side of the fridge with his palm hard enough to make the appliance rattle. "You want attention," he shouted at the empty kitchen. "Here." The fridge chimed again in response, almost playful, and the screen changed. The white page faded into a grainy black and white camera view. For a second, my brain refused to process it because it looked like an old security feed. Then I realized what it was. The missing hour footage. 200A. To trade 00. The camera angle was from our own kitchen near the ceiling, watching the table where we used to eat. The timestamp in the corner read 207A. A figure moved through the kitchen, slowly, unhurried, not trying to hide because there was no one awake to catch him. Hood up. Face, mostly shadow. He opened the fridge easily, no lock for him, took something out, held it close to his face like he was smelling it, then placed it back. Then he looked up directly at the camera and raised his hand in a small wave. The video froze on that frame, his gloved fingers mid-wave, and a line of text appeared over the image like a caption. I can open any door, you can't. My wife made a small choking sound and covered our son's eyes with her hand as if a child could be harmed by a scream. The detective's face went hard. That's him, he said, and for the first time the intruder had offered what we'd been starving for, proof. But it wasn't evidence offered out of care. It was evidence offered like a taunt, like a magician showing you the trick while still keeping the secret. The fridge timer hit 0010000900008, and my heart raced like something terrible would happen at 0. At 0000, the screen went black. Then it lit again, now displaying one simple sentence in clean black letters on a white background. You don't pay with money. You pay with attention. The fridge lock clicked, and the door handle suddenly moved freely. My wife yanked it open and grabbed the medication with shaking hands. Nothing was missing. Nothing was stolen. The intruder hadn't needed our food or our appliances. He'd needed the moment, our panic, our scrambling, our helplessness in front of a screen, and he'd taken it like a payment. As we stood there in the dust of torn drywall, the detective stared into the open wall cavity behind the fridge, like he could stare through wood and find the man's face. Then faintly from somewhere inside the house, somewhere not in any device we could locate, 3 slow knocks sounded back, patient and familiar, thud, 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 and in the quiet that followed, the refrigerator chimed one last time. The kind of gentle, polite chime meant to help you, as if it were reminding us of something we already knew. The house wasn't malfunctioning. It was cooperating. The night it happened for good, the storm arrived first, covering the neighborhood in the kind of blizzard that makes every sound feel far away. Snow packed the windows until the world outside looked like blank TV static, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt isolated in a way that used to mean peace. The detective insisted we shouldn't be there, but we had nowhere else left that wasn't already contaminated, and he said if the intruder wanted rooms, then we would use the biggest room we had left the truth witnessed. He stationed officers outside, set up local recorders inside, sealed the known crawl access points with fresh screws and tamper paint, and replaced every remaining smart lock with heavy deadbolts you could feel in your hand. The smart devices that still existed were supposed to be inert, no cloud, no hub, no Wi-Fi, and yet my wife kept staring at the hallway thermostat mount like it might grow a face. Atunci sprezece, 48. The house was quiet enough that we could hear wind pressing snow against siding like fingertips. Our son finally slept. My wife lay beside him, one arm across his small body, as if her touch could anchor him in a world that kept shifting. I sat at the kitchen table with the detective, both of us too awake, both of us pretending paperwork mattered more than fear. He said, "If he shows, we go loud and we go fast." I nodded, but the truth was I didn't trust fast anymore. Fast is what the intruder wanted. Panic, motion, mistakes. Midnight passed. The furnace cycled normally. The lights stayed steady. The house almost convinced me it could behave. Then at 1:59 am, the kitchen clock ticked to the last minute before the missing hour, and every light in the house dimmed by exactly one shade, as if someone had slid an invisible dial down a notch. Not off, not flickering, dimmed, controlled. The detective's head snapped up. "Did you see that?" he asked. I hadn't touched anything. My hands were on the table. Then, the hallway, thermostat, dead mount, no hub, glowed faintly like an ember behind the plastic, and the number appeared on it as if painted by heat, 95. The vents began to push warm air, steadily increasing, not the jittery surge of a glitch, but the confident rise of a system following instructions. The detective stood moved toward the breaker panel, and as he did, the front deadbolt engaged with a heavy thunk. Then the back door, tunk. Then the basement door at the top of the stairs, tunk. A chorus of metal sliding home, sealing the house like a container. One of the officers outside tugged the front door handle from the porch and shouted through the wood, "It won't open." The detective tried the manual release. It snapped back down by itself, like a hand pushing it. My wife sat up in bed, instantly awake, and whispered, "No, no, no," because she could feel the heat rising like a fever. The TV in the living room turned on by itself to bright, static, and a slow funeral melody began to play through the speakers, not loud, just steady, like a heartbeat you can't ignore. My stomach dropped because I recognized it. It was the same melody from our first escape, the one that had made the house feel like a mouth humming. The detective shouted orders, and the officers moved, but every movement felt like it had been predicted. When one officer ran to a window, the window lock was already flipped to the closed position. When another officer grabbed a lamp to smash glass, the lamp's cord yanked taut as if it had been looped, tripping him. When the detective reached the breaker panel and flipped the main, the lights went out, but the funeral music continued. Battery. Hidden speaker. The same trick, upgraded. In the dark, the kitchen refrigerator chimed, once polite and bright, and its screen lit the room with a white glow. On it, in clean black letters, was a message that felt like a signature, total system takeover. Under it, a countdown 6000. My wife started to cry out loud, and our son began to wail, heat flushing his cheeks. The detective barked, "Get them out," but the doors were dead-bolted, the windows locked, and the only exit left was the front door. We had already breached and repaired. Twice, wood, weakened, frame, scarred, now held shut by a bolt that didn't care. About splinters. The funeral melody swelled slightly, as if the house was enjoying our realization. Then the voice arrived, not through the speaker we could locate, not through the fridge alone, but through the house itself, layered and calm like it spoke from vents and walls and old wiring at once. "You kept asking for the title story," it said softly. "Here it is." The detective yelled, "Who are you?" And the voice answered with the same friendly boredom, like he'd been asked a question he'd heard 1,000 times. "I'm the administrator," it said. "I decide what opens." The heat climbed. 就是二 My wife stumbled into the hallway, clutching our son, desperate for cooler air, and the hallway lights powered off, blinked in a slow, deliberate pattern, casting her face in alternating shadow and pale glow from some battery source we hadn't found. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Not a plea, a taunt. The detective grabbed an axe from the emergency kit he'd insisted we keep and swung it at the front door frame. Wood cracking, splinters, flying, and for a second I tasted hope, the honest violence of physics against the invisible violence of control. Then the voice chuckled softly and said, "Careful," and the smart thermostat mount glowed again, even in darkness, and the vents abruptly switched from heat to cold. Not gentle cool, a hard biting blast, as if the system wanted to prove it could do both. In seconds, my wife's skin goosebumped, sweat cooling on her face. Our son's cry changing pitch, hot to cold, control to disorientation. The house wasn't trying to kill us with one thing. It was trying to unbalance us until we made a mistake that would look like our fault. The refrigerator screen changed. The countdown froze at 5, 2, 1, 3, and the display became a live feed again, our living room, from an angle near the ceiling we had never found. It showed us moving, panicking, the detective swinging the axe, my wife clutching our son. In the corner of the feed, a little label appeared like a streaming watermark, live, and under it, a chat bubble popped up in clean white text, "Say please." My wife's voice cracked. "Please," she whispered, and I hated the way the house listened. The voice sighed like it was pleased. "Better," it said. The front deadbolt clicked once, as if teasing release, then re-engaged with a heavier thump. The funeral melody grew louder, filling the vents, vibrating through floorboards. One of the officers outside began kicking the door from the porch shoulder, driving into wood, and each impact echoed inside like a heartbeat. The detective screamed for them to keep going, and for the first time the voice sounded almost annoyed. "Don't break my house," it said. And then every smoke detector in the house chirped once, then again. Then began a steady alarm, not because of smoke, but because chaos is easier when people can't think. My wife covered our son's ears, sobbing. The detective swung the axe again, and the frame split wider. Cold air knifed in from outside. Snow blew into the entryway like the storm was trying to rescue us. The voice laughed, softly, human, and close. "You always pick force," it said. "That's why you're predictable." The moment the gap widened enough for an arm, the house did its final trick. The funeral melody stopped completely, and the sudden silence was so sharp it felt like pressure. In that silence, the voice whispered, almost tender, "Look up." We all looked because humans obey whispers when they're terrified. Above the hallway, where we had patched drywall after cutting into the crawl channels, a seam opened a fraction, and a small flap of cloth lining dark fabric hung down like a tongue. Behind it for the first time I saw an eye. Not on a screen. Not in night vision. A real human eye, reflecting the dim emergency glow, watching us with calm curiosity. The detective lunged, reaching upward, and the flaps snapped shut. A scrape of movement retreated into the ceiling void. The eye was gone, but the message remained. He wasn't just a voice in devices. He was inside the structure inches above our heads, enjoying the room he'd built. The officers finally splintered the last of the frame and forced the front door open, and we spilled out into the storm. My wife clutching our son, the detective shoving us forward, snow swallowing our footsteps. Behind us, the house lights returned on their own, warm and bright, welcoming, as if nothing had happened. The refrigerator chimed once more through the open door, a polite little sound meant to remind you to close it, and the voice carried out into the blizzard, soft and pleased, like a host saying goodnight. "Thank you for visiting," it whispered. "Come back soon. Your room is ready."